This is a compilation of Half-Life lore I have created over the past few years. No intros, no outros, just lore. Enjoy. Here, we explore in the lore and story behind the Stalkers. The war between the Combine and the armies of Earth was short but horrific, and on the 7th hour, this multi-dimensional alien empire was approached by a spokesperson for humanity, where he offered their submission in return for their lives. But not every member of humanity agreed to this offer and continued to fight for their species. Over their time exploring various dimensions and universes, the Combine conquered countless species, where, upon a successful invasion, they took the valuable resources each planet held, but the worst part was what they did with the sentient lifeforms that had once occupied them. Each species was different from the last, and with an ever-growing army, they looked at the biology of each species, and after exploration and experimentation, they manipulated and adapted their biology in an attempt to form new units for their armies. Each one mentally adapted to follow their rules. And as time went on, many species were brutalized and twisted into the Combine units the Resistance encounter today, some of which known being the Hunter, Advisor, Strider, and so on. As time passed on a Combine-controlled Earth, these aliens once again experimented with this new sentient lifeform they had, and looked at all of the possibilities the human biological structure could be used for. The most prominent being members of the Overwatch. These had volunteered to join the human arm of the Combine army in return for additional benefits with little to no biological modifications, but there was another that was not so optional. A modification some would say was a fate worse than death. The Combine, for the most part, held control over the population of planet Earth extremely well. But with every species that endures an invasion, there will always be outliers that continuously fight back with the aim to return life to the way it was. The Combine were of course aware of these outliers, and so they devised a way to put a stop to these resistance fighters while simultaneously growing their armies and workforce, where they developed the Stalker. The Combine chose the infamous prison of Nova Prospekt to set up their production of this new edition. This was likely due to it already being a place that the human population feared, and where they already had a large quantity of prisoners to experiment on, the majority being captured resistance members, and the unfortunate few who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. While Nova Prospekt was one of the known locations of this barbaric procedure, there may have been other factories across the wasteland. Once selected, the humans were adapted. In this surgical procedure, their hands and lower legs were amputated and replaced with metallic limbs. This adaptation was chosen for two reasons. The first, limited mobility so that the Stalkers would stay in one location, and the second, so that these new limbs could interface perfectly with Combine terminals. The most terrifying transformation was found on their faces, where the Combine chose to destroy the face completely and instead installed a faceplate that allowed them to activate and deactivate the Stalkers when not in use. This also came with mental conditioning to even allow such a feat on the human brain, where it could be turned on and off on command. Behind this faceplate, they were also fitted with high-powered welding lasers, where their eyes had once been, which, upon activation, allowed them to cut through objects with ease thanks to pinholes in their faceplates. Designed to be drone workers to exist in solitary as they performed Combine control tasks across the wasteland, their bodies were drastically transformed to aid this. In their new form of existence, they no longer required a way to communicate with anything around them, so their ability to speak was taken away, where it is believed either their vocal cords or their larynx was removed, leaving them only the ability to grunt. In their new roles, they were required to work unsupervised for long periods of time, and in order to reduce maintenance, the Combine took out their digestive tracts that relied on regular food, and instead installed a gastric port where they were fed with a Combine-designed cocktail of essential nutrients to keep them alive and operating. In doing this, their bodies withered away into a basic, vulnerable frame with just enough muscle and body fat to keep them together. And without the requirement for reproduction, these poor souls also had their reproductive systems removed entirely. To complete this brutal mutilation of the human body, the Stalkers went through mental conditioning to serve the Combine and their orders, which eventually transformed them from barely human into biological husks working as a part of a larger workforce. Following their transformation, the Combine transported their Stalkers in pods to various locations across the wasteland through the use of razor trains, where they were set to work for the remainder of their days. The only known location so far was the Citadel in City 17. Here, they were stationed mostly in the lower levels to work with and maintain the core, monitored from afar by Overwatch units, and they were even noted to guard the core against any intruders that managed to slip into the Citadel. Their lasers had the ability to cut through metal, and if a Resistance member were to be struck by them, they would not survive this encounter. In these moments, cementing the fact that the Stalkers now lived only as mindless slaves to serve the Combine, completely unaware of what they once were. There may have been many other locations and uses for the Stalkers across the planet, but if these did exist, the Combine kept them secret. Approximately 20 years after the Combine's invasion of planet Earth, 2 Resistance members found themselves in Nova Prospekt, but they had not been captured. They had come here by choice with a plan to rescue one of the leaders of the Resistance. As Gordon Freeman and Alyx Vance navigated the prison, they eventually discovered Dr. Eli Vance, but were unsuccessful in their rescue attempt. And to escape the prison, they used an unstable teleporter, which then exploded, taking out part of the facility with it. Although it is unknown whether this explosion took out the part of the facility where the Stalkers were made, it did remove the fear that the Resistance once had about the prison, which began the uprising. If Stalkers could no longer be made, and a major Combine stronghold could be destroyed, then the Combine were not as strong as humanity believed them to be. Over the next week, the Resistance took back their city block by block, until eventually Gordon Freeman arrived in the Citadel. Within the lower levels, the Stalkers worked away, fulfilling their orders given to them by their masters, and even when an explosion left the Citadel unstable, they continued to work, completely unaware of their surroundings, focused solely on keeping the Citadel running. The explosion had been the destruction of a dark fusion reactor on top of the giant structure, which in turn had cut off the Combine's connection to their overworld. So, in a desperate attempt to reclaim their hold over Earth, they essentially set the Citadel to self-destruct to use the energy from this explosion to send off a data packet in the hope to get reinforcements. But to keep the Citadel running until they could manage this, the Stalkers continued to work, unaware of what was happening around them. Although their transformation had been a harrowing experience on the person they had once been, The Combine had no regard for human life, and these were merely replaceable parts of a biological machine. Over this tumultuous time, the Citadel did fall, where all of the Stalkers inside were destroyed with it. In a way, this wave of power released these poor humans from a tortured existence, even if they were not aware of it. It is likely that the creation of Stalkers may have been the worst fate that a human could go through in a Combine-controlled universe. But the universe is a big place, and there may be many other horrors out there. Without an active Nova Prospekt to create new Stalkers, and with the Resistance fighting to reclaim their planet, it appears that the Stalker population in existence may very well be the last. These people had once been champions for change, reduced to mere cogs in a giant Combine machine through a barbaric and evil procedure. And as for the remaining Stalkers in existence, there is hope that the Resistance will come across them and finally allow them peace from an awful existence. Here we explore in the lore and story behind the right man in the wrong place, Dr. Gordon Freeman. Way back before the Earth fell prey to the Combine Empire, a young man grew up in Seattle, Washington. As he studied, he discovered an interest in the world around him and how it worked. Over the years, he took inspiration from the likes of Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein. These men had given so much to the scientific community, and with this need to understand the universe around him, he followed in their footsteps and began the work to acquire a career in theoretical physics. Through his hard work and determination, Gordon managed to get into a program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. While there, Gordon made a strong impression on his peers and professors. One of his professors was Dr. Isaac Kleiner. This man was a well-known name in the scientific community after his research and documentation on teleportation, and this bond between them would later grow into a much stronger relationship. While Gordon's time at MIT is mostly undocumented, it should be noted that his thesis was titled Observation of Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen Entanglement on Supraquantum Structures by Induction through Nonlinear Transuranic Crystals of Extremely Long Wavelength Pulse from Mode-Locked Source Array. Although this title is a mouthful, in essence, Gordon's work studied how matter moved through objects without coming into physical contact with them, teleportation. After continued persistence, Gordon graduated from MIT, and without any known dependents, he moved to Austria and became a part of the Institute for Experimental Physics in Innsbruck. Here, they worked on similar research he had dedicated his studies to, the study of teleportation, and over time, he helped them with their research and even observed a series of teleportation experiments. But with this institute rooted in academia instead of actual scientific advancement, Gordon became discouraged by the lack of development and hands-on experience, and so he looked for a new place that would progress his career in theoretical physics. As he believed he needed hands-on experience to develop his understanding, Gordon applied to well-renowned science companies, and one of these was the Black Mesa Corporation, a government-owned research facility that worked on cutting-edge scientific advancements on a daily basis. As a company of this magnitude, only the best and brightest of applicants were given the opportunity to work here, and in the window of time that Gordon had applied, another hopeful scientist had also piqued the interest of the administration team, Dr. Judith Mossman. Although both of these applicants would have been a welcome addition to the facility, Gordon had an advantage. While Gordon had moved from MIT to study in Austria, his professor, Dr. Isaac Kleiner, had also left MIT and secured himself a job at Black Mesa, where he now worked as one of the core members of the anomalous materials team. With an already established positive relationship with Gordon and his additional experience at the Institute for Experimental Physics, Gordon was offered the position at the top secret Black Mesa research facility, and he accepted. The Black Mesa Research Facility conducted top-secret research and experiments, and as such, the employees here were told that they had to live on the grounds for security purposes. So, when Dr. Gordon Freeman arrived, he was given accommodation in room 309 of the Level 3 dormitories in the north wing of the complex. As a Level 3 employee, Gordon was also given access to all of the Level 3 regions of Black Mesa. In this new role, Gordon was assigned to the Anomalous Materials team in Sector C, where this department spent their days experimenting with quantum research as well as nuclear and subatomic work. Their most prominent work featured an anti-mass spectrometer that was used to analyze exotic samples secured by another team. Unknown to many, this team had actually been tasked with entering a place outside of Earth, the border world of Zen, and on their exploration of this hostile land, they brought back crystals for the Anomalous Materials team. It is unknown just how trusted Gordon was in his team to participate in this work, but it is known that one of his roles was as a materials handler of these exotic samples. A small but important role in this department. As time passed, Gordon grew as a valued member of the Anomalous Materials team, where he met the people that would change his life. He already knew Dr. Isaac Kleiner from his days as a student, and their relationship continued to blossom. He also met Dr. Eli Vance, another incredibly smart man that had just had a little girl, Alyx. In his exploration of Black Mesa, Gordon also met and became friends with a security guard, Barney Calhoun. Over time, these relationships grew where they essentially became a family. Working at Black Mesa was what Gordon had hoped it would be. He learned and experienced new things every day, and in his downtime, he spent time with his friends. On some occasions, Dr. Kleiner would lock himself out of his lab, and so Gordon and Barney would race through the ventilation ducts of the facility to see who could unlock the door first. While Dr. Kleiner was known for his forgetfulness, Gordon also had a reputation for arriving late, and as time went on, it just became a joke within their department. His work was great, he even won Employee of the Month at one point, but his timekeeping was not. Gordon had settled in well and grown in this team, but change was on the way. On an unspecified date in the early 2000s, some believe this to have been May 16th, the Anomalous Materials team were given a crystal sample, GG-3883, to analyze with the anti-mass spectrometer, but this one was different. They were told that the administrator of Black Mesa, Dr. Wallace Breen, had gone to great lengths to acquire it, and he told the Anomalous Materials team that they needed to achieve a conclusive analysis of the sample, even if it meant going outside of the standard testing parameters to achieve it. This order immediately put immense stress and pressure on the Anomalous Materials team, where Eli, Isaac, Arnie, and the many others got to work. They had been used to working a certain way for so long, and there was always a risk that came with going outside of the standard protocols, but Dr. Breen had ordered them to do this, so they proceeded. There was also a shady government-looking man wandering the facility, putting those he encountered on edge. In their efforts to complete this task, the Anomalous Materials team increased the power of the anti-mass spectrometer well above what they had used before. The additional power needed for this machine and other pieces of equipment led to issues across the whole of Black Mesa, where machinery malfunctioned and systems crashed. This morning of stress had set the whole team behind on the experiment, but Gordon missed it all. He was running late. At 8:47 AM, Gordon began his regular journey from his dormitory to the Sector C test labs on the Black Mesa Transit System. Upon finally arriving in the labs, he was mocked by his co-workers for arriving late, but he was also informed that the experiment was running behind, and they were still figuring out some kinks. As scheduled to be a materials handler for the experiment, Gordon put on his protective hazardous environmental suit, and on his way down to the test chamber, he even visited the kitchen and for some reason turned on the microwave. This action would begin a grudge that would last for the next 20 years. Upon arrival in the observation deck of the test chamber, Gordon was updated on the situation by Isaac Kleiner and told to enter the test chamber where the stressful experiment would begin. Unknown to Gordon, his entire 27 years of life had led to this very moment that would change everything. Within the chamber, Gordon followed the instructions of his team in the observation bay, and as standard practice, he activated the anti-mass spectrometer and waited for the sample to come up from the ground. In his mind, this was a standard day. Following this, he pushed the crystal sample into the beam of the machine. Then, everything changed. As the crystal hit the beam of the anti-mass spectrometer, it shattered and flooded the chamber with exotic energy, and this eruption had cataclysmic side effects. All around him, Gordon watched as particles and violent bursts of energy struck out into the chamber. Unknown to him, this disaster had formed a resonance cascade where a hole had been ripped in space, where a bridge had been formed between Earth and the border world of Zen. This bridge in turn allowed the hostile flora and fauna of the border world to enter Earth in an attempt to claim it for themselves. In this chaos, Gordon suddenly found himself in darkness. And that was when he realized he had been teleported to Zen, and he saw up close the other life forms that existed out there in the universe. Before he could be attacked by these creatures, he was pulled back into the test chamber, and his new journey began. As Gordon recovered from the teleportation, he looked around him and saw just how much damage the resonance cascade had caused. As he navigated the Sector C test labs, he discovered the bodies of the victims of this catastrophe. These people had been his friends and co-workers, but luckily, he found Isaac, who had been injured, and Eli, who was trying to help him. Eli explained that the communication system had gone down and there was no way to call for help, and so he asked Gordon to reach the surface and bring back reinforcements. Here, he, just like the other people in this facility, worked his way to any exit he could find. But only minutes into his journey, he came upon a security guard firing at a scientist who had somehow merged with an alien creature. It was here that he realized that an alien invasion had begun and he had to be ready. So, Gordon picked up the first weapon he saw, a crowbar, and continued on his journey to escape the Black Mesa research facility. Without a functioning trans system, Gordon took to the halls and vents he knew well. In these dangerous, claustrophobic corridors, Gordon found himself continuously fighting for his life against the creatures he encountered. Headcrabs, barnacles, and vortigons to name a few. Each creature was different and more dangerous than the last. But the HEV suit he had worn to protect himself from the dangers of the anti-mass spectrometer, as well as his ability to teach himself how to fire any weapon he encountered, kept him safe. With the ability to fight off these forces, Gordon came across his peers that had barricaded themselves in safe locations where he helped them when he could. And then he heard of a military force that had arrived at Black Mesa to rescue them, the Hazardous Environmental Combat Unit. But when Gordon eventually encountered them, he was surprised to see them gun down the scientists instead of helping them. Then he realized They were here to not only take out the invading aliens, but also any witness to this event. So, going forward, Gordon had to fight against both of these hostile forces. On his path, Gordon killed many of the HECU as he navigated the sewers, the surface, and even the underground rail, to the point where this military force openly sought out Gordon by name just so they could have their vengeance on this scientist with a crowbar that had killed many of their own. Although he had turned into a warrior, Gordon still was a scientist and learned from his peers he met along the way that there was a science team hiding out in the Lambda complex that maybe knew of a way to reverse the resonance cascade. Following instructions, Gordon launched a rocket with a satellite attached to it that the scientists believed would close the link between Earth and Zen, and with this complete, he continued his journey towards Sector F. Following additional altercations with the HECU, one of which led to his capture and imprisonment in a trash compactor, Gordon discovered a secret part of Black Mesa where he learned the facility had actively brought back creatures from Zen and experimented with them. They in part had been responsible for this incident. Throughout this journey through the bowels of Black Mesa, Gordon had noticed a man just out of reach watching him from afar. From his emotionless stare, it appeared he was just there to watch him and not help. Finally, Gordon arrived at the Lambda complex and was told by the remaining team here that the reason the rift between Earth and Zen had not closed was because a powerful force had kept it open from the other side. As Gordon had truly shown his ability to adapt and survive in unwinnable situations against both human and alien forces, he accepted the challenge to enter a portal to Zen to kill the creature on the other side so that the rift would close. After arriving in Zen, Gordon fought past the hostile flora and fauna and eventually came upon the lair of the Nylanth, the creature that had ordered its entire army to invade Earth, and after a brutal fight, the creature died where its hold over Earth was released. Gordon then once again found himself teleported, but not to a place he recognized. He found himself standing in front of the shady figure he had noticed watching him from a distance through his whole journey since this catastrophe had begun. The figure, the G-Man, explained to Gordon that he had been watching him and he and his employers were impressed with his limitless potential. He had survived against the odds in impossible situations and they wanted him to work for them. Due to the secretive nature of the G-Man and his employers, Gordon still had no idea what he was being recruited for or what he would have to do, but still, the G-Man gave him a choice: join them or be placed in a fight he had no chance of winning. And so, Gordon accepted the G-Man's offer and entered a green portal into nothingness. Out of nothing, Gordon found himself still within stasis, a timeless void outside of reality. Then, the G-Man appeared once again. It seemed that the job he had been hired for was about to start. As he listened to the G-Man, he was told to rise and shine from his rest, and that his hour had come. After this, Gordon found himself somehow on a train entering a city. Confused, he left the train and saw the director of Black Mesa on a large television screen, welcoming the occupants of this train into City 17. Something was very different about the world, but he could not figure it out. Unknown to Gordon, the moment between entering the green portal and arriving on this train had seemed like mere seconds, when in reality, it had been 2 decades. The G-Man had simply kept him in stasis and frozen his conscious thought. As Gordon navigated the train station, he was ordered to follow some sort of police officer after he had attempted to enter a gate that had closed on him. After following the officer into an office, he took off his mask and revealed himself to be Barney, his friend from Black Mesa. Following this, Barney began a video call to Dr. Isaac Kleiner, and it was a relief to see that they had both survived the Black Mesa incident. Over the next few hours, Gordon learned that he had been gone for much longer than he had thought, and after his actions during the Resonance Cascade, he had, in a way, become revered as a legend. In his absence, the world had been taken over by the Combine, a multi-dimensional alien empire that had used the side effects of the Resonance Cascade to conquer Earth in a mere 7 hours. After escaping the train station, Gordon made his way to Dr. Kleiner's lab, a secret resistance base against this alien force, and on his way there, he met Alyx Vance, the daughter of Eli. But now, she was no longer a child, she was an adult. The Resistance had been waiting for a sign to fight back against the Combine, and they believed this to be Gordon's sudden return. After arriving at Kleiner's lab, he was given back his HEV suit that Isaac had kept and refined over the years. To jumpstart this revolution and to put Gordon's brain and brawn to use, Isaac decided that they needed to send him to another resistance base to work with Dr. Eli Vance, who had also survived the Black Mesa incident. But to get there, they needed to teleport Gordon and Alyx. As trouble appeared to follow Gordon, the teleportation attempt failed on his turn, where he was propelled through space into various locations across the wasteland. Unfortunately, one of these locations was the office of Dr. Wallace Breen, who, upon eye contact, instantly recognized him as the scientist that had disappeared during the Black Mesa incident. In Gordon's absence, Wallace had allied himself with the Combine and had become an enemy of the Resistance. And on a more interesting note, the Vortigaunt species who Gordon had fought during the Black Mesa incident had also joined the Resistance and saw Gordon as the person that would free everyone from the Combine reign. Wallace believed that Gordon could be a threat to this new way of life, and so he alerted the Combine of this potential threat, where a manhunt began. After the teleportation sequence ended, Gordon found himself outside of Dr. Kleiner's lab, where he discovered that he would have to make his way to Eli's lab on foot. Luckily, Barney had somehow managed to save his crowbar, and after handing it to him, he went off. As the symbol for revolution, Gordon met many Resistance members on his path, where they all regarded him as the free man, the person that would help the Resistance reclaim their planet from the Combine. The man with the symbol of the rebellion on his chest, the Lambda sign. After many battles, Gordon eventually arrived at Black Mesa East, the home of Dr. Eli Vance, but unknown to them all, there was a spy in their midst, Dr. Judith Mossman. Judith was aware of Gordon. She also knew that she had lost out on the position at Black Mesa to him, and in some aspects still held a grudge. Judith had a line of contact with Wallace Breen, and as Gordon reunited with his old friend Eli, she let the Combine know where Gordon was. Shortly after, the Combine raided Black Mesa East, but to Gordon's luck, he managed to escape, but Eli was captured. And so, Gordon traveled the wasteland to the Combine's infamous prison of Nova Prospekt to rescue him with Alyx. This rescue attempt was unsuccessful as Judith managed to teleport herself and Eli away into a secure Combine location. To make this situation even worse, the teleporter was incredibly unstable. With no moment to spare, Alyx recharged the teleporter and they escaped Nova Prospekt just before the unstable teleporter exploded, where it took out the prison with it. As Alyx and Gordon arrived in Dr. Kleiner's lab in City 17, he told them that the destruction of Nova Prospekt had occurred a week before and that they must have been stuck in a slow teleport loop. The destruction of a major Combine stronghold and the believed death of 2 strong Resistance members had led the Resistance to start the uprising. If Nova Prospekt could be taken down, then other Combine strongholds also could. As Alyx and Gordon believed that Eli had been sent to the Citadel, the home of Wallace Breen and the center for all Combine activity in the region, Gordon led the resistance to the Citadel with the help of Barney as they took back the city, block by block. After approaching the Citadel, Gordon entered it and allowed himself to be captured just so he could reach the office of Wallace Breen. Here, he was reunited with Wallace, Judith, Eli, and a newly captured Alyx. Wallace appeared to be aware of some sort of control that loomed over Gordon, and that his skill set had essentially been used by them. Of course, they were both aware of the G-Man and his mysterious practices. After a confrontation between Judith and Wallace, Gordon was set free where he chased down Wallace in his goal to free humanity from the Combine's reign. During this showdown, Gordon managed to destroy the Dark Fusion Reactor as Wallace opened a portal to the Combine overworld. The destruction of this reactor had a violent side effect where energy surged from the top of the tower. As this wave of energy came towards Gordon and Alyx, time stopped and the G-Man appeared once again. It appeared that Gordon had somehow done exactly what the G-Man had wanted him to do, and as he had completed his task, he was once again plucked out of reality. The G-Man explained that he was impressed by his work and he had received tempting offers for his services. This time, the G-Man did not give Gordon the illusion of choice, and instead placed him back into stasis, where he hoped to keep him for his next task. In the darkness of stasis, Gordon woke up to find members of the Vortigaunt species breaking him out of the G-Man's prison. As they worked to complete their task, the G-Man entered, but he was unable to stop them. Then, Gordon awoke on Earth again. This time, not a lot of time had passed, and he was reunited with Alyx. Over their adventure together, they had grown extremely close, and they would have many more battles ahead. The destruction of the Dark Fusion Reactor at the top of the Citadel had left the entire structure in meltdown, and it had also cut off the Combine's connection to Earth. This is what the Resistance needed, but the Combine were also waiting for the Citadel to explode so that this energy surge would send a distress message to the Combine overworld and begin the formation of a superportal. With his aim to stop this from happening, Gordon re-entered the Citadel with Alyx and secured the core of the Citadel, just so they and the refugees still stuck in City 17 would have enough time to escape the city before its inevitable explosion. And during their time in the Citadel, Alyx and Gordon discovered the coordinates of the Combine overworld and a message from Judith Mossman on their system, which they stole. Then, in a race against time, they escaped the city as it exploded. With the fall of City 17, the Resistance had moved to another base out in the wasteland, White Forest, and with the information they had stolen from the Citadel, Alyx and Gordon made their way there to play their part in the closing of the superportal. But the Combine were aware of the information they had stolen and attempted to stop them on multiple occasions, one of which led to a brutal assault on Alyx. But to her luck, the Vortigaunt were close by and helped them on their journey. Eventually, Gordon and Alyx arrived at White Forest and helped defend it against desperate Combine attacks as the Resistance scientists developed a rocket with an attached relay device to close the forming superportal, effectively mirroring the actions of Gordon during the Resonance Cascade when he had launched a rocket to sever the link between Earth and Xen. One of the scientists working on this rocket was Dr. Arne Magnusson, who still remembered his last moment with Gordon before the Resonance Cascade, the moment when Gordon had microwaved his casserole to the point of explosion. But Gordon had led the Resistance to this point, and so Arnie in a way forgave him for the casserole incident. In a tense fight, Gordon and the Resistance fought against the Striders and Hunters that breached White Forest's perimeter. These creatures had just one goal: to destroy the rocket. At this point, Gordon had survived so many impossible situations, and he once again used his skills to fight against these creatures and gave the scientists the time they needed to complete the rocket. After another victory, Gordon, Alyx, Eli, and Arnie launched the rocket and watched as it flew towards the forming superportal. In this moment, Eli took Gordon aside and thanked him for all of his work and told him that he could not have been prouder of him even if he was his own son. As the rocket hit the superportal, it closed and gave humanity their chance to completely reclaim their planet from the leftover Combine forces on Earth. These forces were now cut off from the Combine overworld and had to rely on each other without backup. Although the superportal had closed, the Resistance still had urgent issues they had to deal with, one of these being the rescue of Dr. Judith Mossman from the north after she had discovered the Borealis, a potentially extremely powerful piece of technology that could aid the Resistance in their mission to completely rid the Combine from the planet. So, Gordon and Alyx made their way to a hangar, accompanied by Eli, who wanted to wave them off. Unknown to them, the Combine had not given up and were desperate to stop any more Resistance wins. So, 2 Combine advisors struck the hangar and attacked the trio. To their luck, a Resistance robot, Dog, dropped in from the ceiling and helped to stop this attack. But there were still casualties. They were 1 person down, but they did not have time to mourn the lost. There was still a mission to complete in the north, and Gordon was the man to do it. The man with a crowbar. Once a simple scientist that wanted to explore the universe, Gordon Freeman essentially got what he wanted, just not in the way he expected to. The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference, and Gordon truly did. Over his 20-year disappearance, the various factions he had encountered during the Black Mesa incidents all remembered him for different things. The scientists saw him as a savior. The Vortigaunt saw him as the man with a crowbar running at them through the steel corridors, and the survivors of the Black Mesa incident who later joined the Resistance saw him as a symbol of revolution. In a way, he was all 3 of these. Throughout Gordon's journey, the G-Man had taken a keen interest in his actions, where his choices during the Resonance Cascade essentially acted as a job interview where his skills would be used in the war to come. But following interference from the Vortigaunt, Gordon broke away from the G-Man's influence and control to the point where he and his employers had to look elsewhere for someone that could take his place, a new pawn for their plans. As of now, it is unknown what happened to Dr. Gordon Freeman. Maybe one day we will know, but what we know for sure is that whatever he does and wherever he goes, his crowbar will be with him, and he will fight to the death against the Combine Empire as the G-Man watches from a distance. Here we explore in the lore and story behind the Combine Advisor. Only a mere 7 hours into the Combine invasion of planet Earth, the human population surrendered and offered their servitude in return for their lives. As a human, Dr. Wallace Breen negotiated this deal on behalf of humanity, where he became Earth's administrator. From here, he reported directly to the Combine, where he acted as their spokesperson and attempted to keep the resistance of the enslaved species in line. Very little is known about the origin of the Combine Advisor, just like the Combine themselves. But as the spokesperson for humanity, Wallace reported directly to them, and in turn, they judged his ability to keep his species compliant. From appearance, the advisors are large, floating grubs with adaptations to their natural biological structure, suggesting these too were modified to serve in the Combine's army. But their appearance should not elude the fact that these are highly intelligent creatures. In their adaptation, the species were given a bodysuit and a collar. On this collar are symbols, but it is unknown what they mean. They could be from their homeworld or are Combine in nature. To explore and navigate their surroundings, the Combine advisor were given a cybernetic eyepiece and metallic arms with claw-like appendages. While they often kept their distance from the resistance, when forced to, they were shown to use their arms to lift their enemies as they opened their masks to reveal a tongue-like appendage. In these rare moments, the advisors were shown to strike into the neck of a human resistance member with force, killing them. Not only did this take out one of the many of a growing army, but they were also able to absorb the memories and knowledge their prey had held, so that they could gain a greater insight into their enemies, something that came in handy as the commanders of the Combine Empire on Earth. As of this moment, it appears that the Combine advisors are the leaders of the entire Combine Empire, as no other species has revealed themselves, but we can never be too sure. Alongside their ability to guide an army and strike at foes when necessary, the advisors are vulnerable to physical attacks due to the nature of their biological structure, but it would take luck to even reach an advisor thanks to their powerful psychic abilities. Using these, they communicated with each other and humans. An example of this is when they would communicate with Dr. Wallace Breen telepathically as they guided him on how to govern the human population. To incapacitate a foe, they also used their telepathy to reach into the minds of the human to impair their vision and sight. To complement their telepathic abilities, they used their telekinetic powers to fly and manipulate the surrounding environment to their needs, a dangerous combination for anyone that got in their way. Although having come to planet Earth to conquer humanity, this planet was not a natural habitat for them, where they had to reside in the Citadel and other safe spaces across Earth in powered pods with life support technology, just until they were able to hatch. But it is unknown what they were waiting to hatch into. If their safe location were invaded by the Resistance or other dangerous factors, they would be escorted by Combine soldiers through the use of razor train or by foot to another location. From their pods, they communicated with Dr. Breen, the Overwatch and Skywatch to keep their control of humanity tight. While the majority of humanity were unaware of their existence due to Wallace being the spokesperson for them, the Vortigaunt species seemed aware of their control and ability to hatch. But as with the rest of the information on the Combine advisor, or Shu Ulathoi in the Vortigaunt tongue, this information is limited. As Gordon Freeman returned from stasis, the advisors began to question Dr. Breen's ability to capture him and control the growing resistance, where he had to defend himself on many occasions. Breen was out of his depth and could not control the actions of the scientist, to the point where Gordon led a charge across City 17 as the Resistance attempted to take back the planet. After the Resistance managed to confront Wallace in his office, the administrator fled and asked the advisor for refuge. In response, they offered him a host body to live on the Combine homeworld. But Gordon Freeman managed to stop Breen before he could transfer his consciousness after the scientist destroyed the Dark Fusion Reactor. With their spokesperson dead, the advisors took control of the situation. Now cut off from the Combine overworld, they ordered for the destruction of the Citadel so that they could send a message for reinforcements. As they did this, the advisors evacuated the Citadel one by one to safe locations outside of the range of the explosion that would happen after the Citadel fell. With the Resistance gaining control over Sector 17, the advisors ordered their forces to recapture the planet. With their network, they were able to keep up to date with what the Resistance were doing to stop them, where they paid close attention to the efforts of Gordon Freeman and Alyx Vance. After the fall of the Citadel, a superportal began to form, where Alyx and Gordon began a journey to another secret Resistance base. But they had managed to steal sensitive information from the Citadel. Information about the Borealis and the coordinates of the Combine overworld. The advisors knew that if this information were to be used by the Resistance, it would be even harder to regain control of Earth. So, they sent units after them to retrieve it, but these units failed their mission. After discovering the location of the secret Resistance base, the Combine advisors sent what they could to White Forest with the intention to stop the construction of a rocket that the Resistance were developing to close the forming superportal. As the Hunters, Striders, and various other units attacked, the advisors saw defeat once again. Unfortunately, the Resistance held off the units and launched the rocket successfully, where it closed the superportal, cutting off contact. Although they had lost once again, two advisors noticed three core members of the Resistance in a hangar, who were preparing to travel to the north to locate the Borealis using the information they had stolen from the Combine. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the advisors struck and effortlessly pinned Alyx and Gordon to a wall as they lifted Eli and prepared to kill him. In one timeline, the advisors struck Eli in the neck and killed him, where it absorbed what it could from his brain as the other prepared to take Alyx. But a Resistance robot crashed through the ceiling and fought them off. Unprepared, they fled. In another timeline, with the interference of the G-Man, Vortigaunt's energy traveled through time and struck the advisor holding Eli and killed it, saving Eli. Regardless, in both timelines, the advisors failed to regain control of the planet, but with knowledge of the Borealis, a ship that potentially had incredible technologies on board, their next fight would take place in the north to acquire it. This is where the official lore and story of the Combine advisor ends. But this may not be the whole story. Half-Life 2 was originally intended to have 3 episodes after its release. We received Episode 1 in 2006 and Episode 2 in 2007, but Episode 3 never came. From what we know of Episode 3 and the originally discovered concept art, the Combine advisors were to be more prominently featured as Alyx and Gordon traveled to the north to discover the Borealis. We may never know what was truly to happen in Episode 3, but media released since could give us a good idea. Now, none of the information past this point in the video is canon, but I believe it could have been. With these pieces of media, I will only focus on the advisor parts as this video is about the Combine advisor. I am adding this as I feel I cannot make an in-depth video on the Combine advisor without at least diving into this additional media. Now, 5 years after the release of Half-Life 2 Episode 2 in 2012, Mark Laidlaw, a writer for Valve, began a Twitter account called BreenGrub. On this account, he told the story of Wallace Breen as a new entity called the BreenGrub and what happened to him, or a version of him, after his death. On this account, he also told the story of the Combine advisor and their origin. Again, this is not canon as it does not take place in the original story. However, there is evidence that the BreenGrub was to feature in Episode 3, which I'll explore later. In this story, BreenGrub mentions that there is, or was a world, the home of the Shu Ulathoi. In the Half-Life series, the Vortigaunt refer to the advisor by this name. This world existed within the Globular Cluster, a place with erratic seasons with lethal properties. In the larval stages of the species, the Shu Ulathoi appeared as grub-like creatures, just like the ones we met in Half-Life, before they were adapted with cybernetic enhancements. Due to the nature of their planet, these grubs buried themselves to avoid the radiation of the planet as they waited to hatch. Although physically separated from their kind, they were not dormant. As a species of powerful psychics with a racial telepathy, they formed a psychic network and world with their minds where the species thrived with philosophers, scientists, dreamers, sages, and composers of intricate art forms that only existed in their minds. Worlds that only the Shu Ulathoi could visit and explore. In these worlds, visions were traded like currency in their society, which allowed them to continue building their unseen worlds. While most of the species in this form lay dormant, connected to this invisible world, there were others who could simply not connect to their kin, so instead, they mated, laid eggs and died when new grubs grew and connected to the invisible world. This early age of the Shu Ulathoi was a grand culture of dreamers with little use for the waking world, or its insistence on material things. After hatching, the Shu Ulathoi turned into something new. Their psychic strength allowed them to imprint upon their own cells, where they turned into whatever they envisioned. While this would sound great, moving from the larval stage adapted their psychic and telekinetic abilities, where they could no longer connect to the dreamer's world, where the grubs would simply stop acknowledging them, and this cycle consisted for aeons. As with all great things, this golden age would not last. This mode of existence allowed them to create unseen worlds, but it also carried their seed of destruction. The Shu Ulathoi had the ability to create from thought, and one grub had a rogue thought of a parasite, a malformed thought with physical ramifications. Over time, the parasitic thought transmitted through their psychic network and spread, where the whole race of sleeping philosophers was quickly infected. As with most species, the strongest with natural defenses survived, while the weak fell victim to thought paths of depravity, while their molt became untenable and their abilities to reproduce were taken away. Although the Shu Ulathoi could not completely remove the parasite, the survivors learned to live with it, where it became a part of them. From time to time, there were similar eruptions, but having survived the initial parasite, the grubs had developed social mechanisms to isolate their depraved kin, where they severed them from telepathic contact to reduce the spread of the malign thoughts. This allowed the grubs to live on while the depraved kin died in solitude. For generations, they used this system to protect their unseen worlds as they hatched. This was until the Combine came across them. Upon discovery, the Combine found these vulnerable creatures in their dormant state. After examining them, they noticed the parasite that had developed on their physical forms, and using their advanced technology, they extracted the parasite and weaponized it. With their own weapons of thought, they injected their virus into the psychic network where it rotted the minds and culture from within. As the grub Shu Ulathoi were unaware of their physical surroundings, it was too late when they discovered what was actually happening to them. Some did wake up and were able to flee, but most of them fell victim to the Combine and their rule. Having gained access to the ruins of their invisible world, the Combine took all of the information they could about the Shu Ulathoi, and after finding many of the grubs, they set up a nursery and began experimentation on how this species could enhance their armies. They discovered that the Shu Ulathoi in their larval grub stage had powerful psychic and telekinetic abilities, and their bodies could act as hosts. The ancient parasite that the grubs had fought aeons before was adapted by the Combine and used to imprint various sentient classes onto the hosts. Therefore, the Combine could imprint many of their leaders, great minds, and whatever else they chose.
With this, they bred and stored the creatures as blank slates to store the minds of the greatest thinkers they encountered as they conquered civilizations, but also soon discovered that this was just the larval stage. So, they attached a device to suppress their metamorphosis, and for those they used to hold their great thinkers, leaders, and warriors, they attached the amplifying devices we have seen for locomotion and investigation. The collar with runes around their necks may in fact be the device they used to suppress their metamorphosis, but that is more of a theory. This is where the backstory and lore ends for the advisors from the Breengrub Twitter account. This is such a detailed backstory and is perfectly connected to the Half-Life universe. At the end of Half-Life 2, Breen is offered a host body so that he can survive on the Combine overworld, and in Breengrub, it appears an older version of his consciousness was uploaded to one. This whole backstory of the Shu Ulathoi tells us that they are just another victim of the Combine, and that they are not in charge of the Combine invasions. But the minds inside of the grubs did come from somewhere, so it is likely that the Combine leaders, or copies of them, were transferred into the host bodies to aid in the invasions. In 2017, Mark Laidlaw posted Epistle 3 on his blog, which is a play on Episode 3 and gives the plot of what Mark envisioned Episode 3 to be. As of writing this script, Mark has taken down this post on his blog after it had been up for over 5 years. Anyway, in this story, Alyx and Gordon travel to the north and meet Breengrub. At this point, we were briefly detained, not captured by the Combine as we feared at first, but by minions of our former nemesis, the conniving and duplicitous Wallace Breen. Dr. Breen was not as we had last seen him, which is to say, he was not dead. At some point, the Combine had saved out an earlier version of his consciousness, and upon his physical demise, they had imprinted the backup personality into a biological blank resembling an enormous slug. The Breengrub, despite occupying a position of relative power in the Combine hierarchy, seemed nervous and frightened of me in particular. Wallace did not know how his previous incarnation, the original Dr. Breen, had died. He knew only that I was responsible. Therefore, the slug treated us with great caution. Still, he soon confessed, never able to keep quiet for long, that he himself was a prisoner of the Combine. He took no pleasure from his current grotesque existence and pleaded with us to end his life. Alyx believed that a quick death was more than Wallace Breen deserved, but for my part, I felt a modicum of pity and compassion. Out of Alyx's sight, I might have done something to hasten the slug's demise before we proceeded. From this extract of Epistle 3, Breen was successful in having his consciousness transferred into a host body, but this was an older consciousness as his physical body had died. This builds upon the lore given to us in Half-Life 2 and the Breengrub Twitter account as it essentially continues the story. Mark Laidlaw has spoken about Breengrub and stated this: basically it's me writing Dr. Breen fanfic. I am his biggest fan, and therefore all of this is non-canon. But what if it was planned to be? Well, on the 25th of April 2022, a Valve fan, David McGreevy, posted a tweet of him scanning never-before-seen Valve concept art. He is currently in the process of creating high-quality versions of them, so I will only show the one important to this video. While all of them are stunning and open up so many questions about what Valve was planning to do at one point, I want to focus on one image. On the top left here, we can see a grub-like creature. This one, the Breengrub, which is labelled Breen Host Body. Valve had concept art for the Breengrub, which was designed for the cancelled Episode 3. In this concept art, we can see how miserable he looks, which mirrors what he was like in Epistle 3 before he asked Gordon and Alyx to kill him. If the Combine could imprint a consciousness onto him, it is also likely that the backstory of the Shu Ulathoi, their dreamer's world, and the parasite that threatened it before the Combine discovered them was, at one point, considered to be a part of the plot. Mark has stated his work is fanfiction, but this lore fits perfectly into what we know about the Combine Advisor. I would love this backstory to be the true origin of the Advisor. We were given limited lore in Half-Life, so it would have been great to learn all of this in Episode 3. We know the Advisors were to play a more prominent role in the game as they featured in the concept art. If all of this information is actually canon, or was planned to be, I would say the Advisor, or in their original name, the Shu Ulathoi, are one of the most interesting species in the Half-Life series. This also begs the question, if the Shu Ulathoi that managed to escape the Combine had the ability to turn into any form they wanted upon hatching, where are they now? Are they hiding, still fearful of the Combine, or are they working against them in a form that appears human, but is not? Regardless, going off the official canon information, the Combine Advisors are probably the most powerful known species in the Combine army. At the end of Episode 2, we see them now adjust to Earth's atmosphere, and if their bright minds can guide the Combine forces against the Resistance, as well as take on the Resistance by thought, then humanity will have a tough war to get through. With the Resistance now travelling to the north to find the Borealis and rescue Judith Mossman, the Advisors will also seek this ship in their endeavour to stop the Resistance to regain control of planet Earth. In this video, we explore Valve's most tragic and brutally mutilated humans, the Stalkers from the Half-Life 2 beta. As the development of Half-Life 2 made way, Ted Bachman, a designer at Valve, was inspired to make an enemy that would scare the players and add more of a horror element to the game. He was inspired by a black version of the Half-Life skeleton player model, horror-esque, but it needed attributes to bring out that Half-Life element he wanted. The developer who had originally made this skeletal model suggested that this entity could possibly hide in the shadows and leap out at the player when they got close. With this brief visual and horror element, Ted and Valve had something to develop. From here, Valve expanded on their idea of this enemy and turned it into more of an emotional choice on how to deal with them. They worked on the Stalkers and made them crouch down in the dark and follow the players around, which is where their name came from, Stalkers. When the player either turned a corner or turned around, they would then be surprised by the creature. The emotional aspect of this was what the creatures were and how they became this way. In the lore behind these, as we know, the Combine Empire jumped from universe to universe and sought out any sentient species they could to turn them into biological weapons in their multi-universal army. A part of this process was the analysis and brutal mutilation of the species so that they could be turned into, I guess, better and more efficient soldiers. The Combine adapted humanity in various ways. The most common was through the Civil Protection, a sort of human police force used by the Combine to keep the rest of humanity in line. This was a voluntary position, and with it, so were the biological modifications that came with each rank in the Civil Protection. The Stalker process was involuntary and reserved for Resistance members and those generally deemed enemies to the Combine. After capture, the Resistance members were taken to a Combine stronghold. The most commonly known was Nova Prospekt, but there may have been others across the wasteland. After arrival, these poor humans were restrained, muzzled and collared with some sort of barbaric metal. This was also one of the first design choices for the Stalker, as seen here in this concept art, still recognizable as human and clearly in a lot of pain. This is where it gets brutal. These captured humans were resistant in nature as they openly fought against a much stronger force. To counter this, the Combine implemented methods to break them down to make this transformation smoother, almost like a product on a production line at a factory. During this process, the prisoners' hands were severed to reduce the risk of an attempt to escape. Although their hands were gone, they could still run, so the Combine moved on to the next stage. This physical transformation reduced the number of Resistance members, but they needed to actually make these creations useful and productive in their army and workforce. To do this, they began the process of mental conditioning and continued it throughout the physical transformation so that they would be compliant and serve their keepers as slave laborers. The Keeper title was given to the owner or handler of the Stalker. With their mental conditioning underway, the humans were then hobbled to stop them from running, and this would have had a huge psychological effect on the subject. There was no way of escape. This was now an unavoidable fate. Eventually, their lower legs were removed entirely. Having analysed the human body and learned the bare minimum of what it needed to actually function, the Combine took out all of the Stalker's unnecessary organs and then put them on a saline solution to keep the body running. This procedure was essentially performed to make them easier to maintain. This saline solution, in turn, led their bodies to deteriorate to the point where they turned into a mere skeletal frame with a layer of yellow skin. This was almost in line with Ted Bachman's view of what he wanted the Stalkers to look like. At this point, the mental conditioning, if successful, would have removed the last sense of humanity in these poor humans. Essentially, they had become mindless husks conditioned to follow only the orders of the Combine. Towards the end of this barbaric mutilation, and now ready to serve the Combine, braces were fixed to the stumps of where their lower legs had once been to allow them to walk again. This was likely extremely painful, but at this point, for their sake, hopefully their mental conditioning had somehow allowed them to ignore pain. For ease of control and handling by their keepers, the Combine placed a girder on their heads with 5 holes in front of each eye for them to see. They were also able to use their muzzles to lap up fluids like an animal. These human resistance members had turned into something less than human, a fate worse than death. Unfortunately, their plight was not over yet. Under the control of the Combine, these creatures were sent out into the wasteland with orders from their keepers. This is where their stalking element came in. They would creep around in the shadows, stalk, and then lunge at those that opposed the Combine. As the player, we would have encountered these frequently. In Ted Bachman's words, "When you face them, they are these crazed half-human things that you cannot help but almost pity. I was hoping to put enough humanity into the things that it wasn't just a scary monster. Instead, it was something that presented a moral dilemma every time you had to deal with it, which I think is a more interesting problem. It is more horrific to have to deal with an insane hostage than something that just wants to eat your brains." Although it is not noted on the concept art or development documents I could find, these Stalkers also had the ability to emit powerful beams of energy from their eyes. From this concept art, we can also see that the Combine attached equipment and weaponry to their arms so that they could fulfill their orders. We all know of the Half-Life 2 leak. It portrayed a vastly different version of the game we eventually received. The locations and creatures had a more dystopian and darker feel. For the most part, I prefer the retail version of Half-Life, but there were elements that I feel we missed out on. One of which was the cremator. I wish we had received that. At least we had a sort of Easter egg with its head in a jar in Eli's lab. Anyway, in this leak, the Stalkers were to be encountered throughout most of the game, found frequently in the Cut Air Exchange level and on the Borealis, which in the beta was not this mysterious ship built by Aperture Science that had immense technology on it. It was just a normal ship that transported goods. One of these goods were the Stalkers, which were stored in hanging cages. They also helped Elena Mossman in the operation of her secret resistance base, Kraken Base. Elena Mossman was the original version of Judith Mossman. From what I can tell, they had a similar storyline. For enemies so well designed and apparently implemented pretty well into the game, what happened to them? Although Valve had a brilliant vision for the Stalkers, they found that these creatures were not fun to work with. Valve did create various gameplay puzzles for the players to solve using them. An example is using the Stalkers to cut through sheets of metal with their laser beams, but even these were considered boring tasks to perform. Valve determined that the majority of the sequences that involved the Stalkers appeared scripted and stagey, so unfortunately, they were taken out of the game, redesigned and reintroduced to have a different role in the story of Half-Life. With the release of Half-Life 2 after the leak, players obviously noted the huge difference between the games. Half-Life 2 was still a dark game, but it was a lighter tone than the beta. We also had to wait until the end of Half-Life 2 and later in Half-Life 2 Episode 1 to discover what happened to the Stalkers. They follow a similar lore, but they have a huge visual difference. Looking at these side by side, the Stalkers in the retail version, although terrible, are pretty tame in comparison to the beta. The beta skin is literally stitched together to keep it on. Personally, the worst part about the beta Stalker is the belt around their spine. It is incredibly uncomfortable to look at. The retail version is more fleshed out. They have had a similar transformation in terms of losing their hands, lower legs, organs, reproductive system, and so on. But just look at the difference in hip bones. In the beta, we can see the bone. It's disgusting to look at. They also had a completely different function in the game. Instead of stalking the player, these Stalkers are shown to operate combine machinery in the Citadel to keep it running. They are just drones that operate machinery and they are extremely passive. Unless the player interacts with them, they will ignore you and just get on with their tasks, which begs the question, why are they still called Stalkers? I would like to think that maybe the Combine used them for stalking in other parts of the world. Maybe. This change in their functionality in Half-Life 2 also took away part of that emotional impact Ted wanted to portray with the creatures. Sure, the retail version of the Stalkers are still tragic, but as the player, we could just ignore them and move on without interaction. But in the beta, we were preyed upon by them and had to make that choice to put them out of their misery, completely aware of what they had once been. I named my first Stalker lore video A Fate Worse Than Death, and these still carry that name, but the beta Stalkers are something else, a truly terrifying existence. I understand why Valve changed the function of the Stalkers in terms of puzzle mechanics, but I still wish they had kept their original design. It's haunting and adds a more terrifying feel to the Half-Life universe. I also wish that they had kept that stalking element. They would have been great to encounter in Ravenholm, the canals of City 17, and maybe even in the halls of Nova Prospekt as you work your way through the prison. Out of all of the creatures and changes Valve made from the beta, this is one I would have loved to have seen in the retail game. Here, we explore in the lore and story behind the Headcrabs and Zombies of Half-Life. Far away from planet Earth, the homeworld of the Gonarch and its children connected to the border world of Xen. a place between dimensions and space. During this connection, some of this species traversed across and explored this new land of floating islands. However, this connection was limited and left these new inhabitants stranded. Nothing was native to Zen. All plant life and creatures had travelled across, just like the Gonarch had. This was a unique place with a diverse, dangerous ecosystem formed from travellers across dimensions. As it wandered the extraordinary islands of Zen, the Gonarch, a large, powerful creature on 4 legs with a reproductive sac in its centre, gave birth to countless tiny headcrabs as it moved. These tiny creatures had just begun their first life stage, and the Gonarch was what they would become in their final stage. This of course depended on their decisions as they grew to reach that point. As the creator of these many children, the Gonarch became highly aggressive towards anything that came near it and attacked on sight with a charge, or through the creation of an acidic projectile. The children, dubbed headcrabs by humanity, were much smaller than their parent, and over time grew to the size of a pumpkin, around 8.5 pounds, and wandered Zen. On Earth, the Black Mesa Research Facility discovered the border world of Zen as they experimented with teleportation technology. Following this, they set up survey teams to explore the islands and constructed labs to study the samples of Zen these teams brought back. Within the Advanced Biological Research Lab and the Gamma Labs, the scientists took a keen interest in the headcrab. Here, just like every other Zenian creature they acquired, the Black Mesa personnel attempted to understand the biology and life cycle of the headcrab. This was a particularly interesting specimen as they did not look threatening in appearance, but the scientists did notice that these heavy balls of flesh with legs attempted to leap at anything around them that looked even vaguely similar to a humanoid. Unknown to the scientists, these creatures were incredibly dangerous. They discovered from observation and analysis that the headcrabs were capable of surviving on both plant-based and meat diets, and although they were small, their legs allowed them to clumsily propel their bodies a great distance of an average of 10 feet at a target as they attempted to reach them. Their jumps at this point were guided by 6 eyes that helped them line up their attacks, 3 eyes just below each of their front legs. Black Mesa didn't add the eyes to their revamped model, so here is the original lore-friendly model from Half-Life. Flipped over, the Black Mesa scientists discovered the headcrab's most impressive, or should I say most terrifying feature: a large, gaping mouth that allowed the creatures to feed on their prey and hold on tight to their target. Inside their mouth, the scientists also found a hidden beak that, upon study, allowed them to take in nutrients, and it even had the strength to break through a human skull. On Zen, the survey teams also observed where the headcrabs fell on the food chain in this unique ecosystem. They were placed near the bottom as another species, the Vortigaunt, caught them, kept them in cages, and roasted them on an open fire. The survey team also noticed that the bull squid seemingly had a natural disdain for the headcrabs and hunted them down on sight. The analysis of this species had given Black Mesa a great insight into the border world of Zen, but there was just one more feature the headcrabs had not yet displayed: something horrific. The exploration of Zen gave Black Mesa a greater understanding of how the border world functioned. Unfortunately, this mission also came with great risk. Zen was a dangerous place, and casualties happened from time to time. The personnel also learned the hard way what happened when the headcrab managed to successfully leap onto a human. If a headcrab were to make a successful leap, it used its weight and muscles around its mouth to firmly fix itself into position. At this point, the victim had little chance to push the creature off. Ready for the next stage, the headcrab used its hidden beak to break through the skull to gain access to the brain. This is where the true nightmare began. With exposure to the human brain, the headcrabs tapped into the brainstem and took over their basic motor functions, which in turn allowed them to control the human body. They were the perfect parasite. As a result of this connection between human and headcrab, the human's biology changed. Those unfortunate enough to witness this watched as the host's flesh deteriorated as their skin and organs broke down and their fingers grew out into sharp claws. However, they still retained the ability to walk and interact with the environment around them. Even when injured, the hosts remained upright due to their connection to the parasite. In some cases, the host's ribcage even ripped open to reveal the slight biological changes the headcrab had made as it formed a stronger hold over the unwilling host. This transformation process was noted to take anywhere from several seconds to several minutes, depending on the host and the will of the headcrab. The worst part about this was that the host was kept alive and conscious throughout the entire procedure as they felt every ounce of pain, desperate for escape. Although having lost control over most of their body, the hosts were still able to plead for help, but as a result of the headcrab's influence, their desperate pleas came out backwards.
You've got help! Help me!
This process had a harrowing effect on the host's body, but some scientists wondered if a host could survive if the headcrab was removed. Even now, many years later, we simply do not know. We could speculate that it would depend on how far into the transformation the parasite was removed. The further along, the less likely. With the initial variation of the human and headcrab combination labelled as the zombie, the scientists also saw over time that as these zombies matured, some grew stronger, their claws grew even longer, they became more aggressive, and their bodies adapted to the biological substances injected from the headcrab. This variation was labelled the gonome. With full control of a human host, the headcrab zombies became instantly hostile and attempted to kill everything around them. As they wandered around, they did not appear to be fazed by potential dangers in the area. It was later noted that even when they came into contact with fire, sharp objects, or the various other dangers of the world, the zombies continued in their path to kill a target. These parasites appeared to be unfazed by the damage to their hosts' bodies. This could not be said for the humans who screamed in pain and begged for this awful existence to end. They had been through so much and were still very much conscious. This symbiotic relationship between headcrab and host appeared to be a perfect match, even though the species had never met before the discovery of Zen. This suggested that while these creatures came from another world, their world did have a process very similar to the attachment of headcrab and host. Regardless, more of humanity would soon become aware of the headcrab and how they could control a human. In the early 2000s, the Black Mesa Research Facility conducted an experiment that went very wrong, which led to a resonance cascade. This essentially meant that a hole was ripped in space between Earth and Zen, and as a result, the creatures of Zen were pulled through to Earth. A leader of Zen, the Nylanth, also took advantage of this situation and sent through its forces to conquer this new world. Over the following hours, the headcrabs once again had to learn a new world and attack the scared personnel as they attempted to escape this facility on the brink of complete failure. With so many headcrabs scattered across the claustrophobic halls of Black Mesa, it did not take long for them to find hosts to control, and soon, the halls filled with headcrab zombies, each human in excruciating pain under the control of their new masters. To the luck of these humans, the next day, a military force, with the help of a mysterious figure, activated a thermonuclear device and released them from their pain as the entire Black Mesa research facility was purged of all life. Shortly after the fall of Black Mesa, one of the scientists, Dr. Gordon Freeman, managed to take out the leader of the Xenian invasion and close the rift between Earth and Xen. Although the resonance cascade had ended, the headcrabs that had been pulled through to the rest of Earth had no way to return home and were here to stay. Along with the other Xenian creatures, the stranded aliens fought with humanity as this was their new home. In humanity's weakened state, another alien force, the Combine, invaded the planet and successfully accepted the submission of humanity in a mere 7 hours. Over the following years, the Combine adapted the planet to solidify their hold over humanity. They created settlements to hold the humans and fought with the remaining Xenian lifeforms to keep them outside of these safe havens. During this time, a resistance formed against the Combine, and as opposing forces, they worked on ways to fight against each other. One of the leaders of the resistance, Dr. Isaac Kleiner, captured a headcrab and managed to domesticate it by removing its beak. This did not remove Lamar's need to jump onto the heads of the humans she interacted with, but she could no longer hurt them. Over a decade after the Combine's invasion and the headcrab's migration to Earth, resistance scientists noticed a change in the headcrab's biology. The 6 eyes they had once used to target a foe simply disappeared. This could have been a design choice by Valve between games to make the headcrabs appear more menacing, or this could have been an evolutionary change to adapt to their new environment on planet Earth, and as a result, would have learned to use other methods to navigate the wasteland. The most interesting part about this time period was that the population of the planet discovered new variations of the headcrab, and there were 3 potential reasons as to why they had not been spotted before. The first, they had just not been discovered yet. The second, an evolutionary change as a result of their new environment. And the third, they had been developed as weapons by the Combine. The Resistance discovered a subspecies of headcrab that had the ability to withstand large amounts of damage and ammunition. Labeled the armored headcrab, this variation appeared to have been preyed upon by a Xenian fungus, and as a result, this floral parasitic growth had managed to attach itself to the headcrab and grown on it. This allowed the growth to spread its seeds around the locations the headcrab traveled to, and in return, provided the headcrab with protection against anything that attempted to harm it. This was a mutually beneficial relationship. However, this hard layer of protection only applied to the top of the headcrab and still left its mouth vulnerable, even more vulnerable than a standard headcrab. If this headcrab were able to take hold of a host, the zombie acted in a similar way to the standard. The Resistance just found these harder to kill due to their armored shell. The Lightning Dog, also known as Revivers or Runners, were discovered by Alyx Vance during her time in the quarantine zone. These creatures share similarities with the headcrabs in terms of their size and the ability to manipulate the human structure, and are thought to either be cousins or another subspecies of the headcrab. These had a bioluminescent skin, a tail, and their limbs were connected by a thin sheet of tissue. This allowed them to move quickly as they attempted to find a host when under attack. It should also be noted that the entity name inside of the Half-Life Alyx game files is NPC Headcrab Runner. These terrifying variants had the ability to manipulate electrical currents, which in turn allowed them to affect the machinery around them, and they even fired electrical spit at their targets. As a lone creature, the Lightning Dog could injure those around it, but it was more dangerous when it was paired with a human. The Lightning Dog's behavior was similar to the headcrab, but they did have some differences. The Lightning Dog was only shown to be able to take control of a dead headcrab zombie, and instead of taking control through the brain, they were able to burrow into the chest cavity to revive their host. These electrified zombies were able to take a lot more damage than their other variations. On a more interesting note, these were aware of how much damage their hosts could withstand, and if the humans started to break down, they left their host and looked for another one. To fight back, the electric zombie had the ability to fire bursts of electricity to wound their attacker, and use flashes of light and smoke to distract their enemies when cornered in an attempt to escape. When killed, the lightning dogs left an electric orb. These orbs were also noted to be compatible with Combine technology. This could indicate that the Combine either designed some of their technology around the biology of this creature, it was a coincidence, or the Combine had developed these creatures themselves. Interestingly enough, it should be noted that the armored headcrab and the lightning dog were not spotted in City 17 or the Wasteland approximately 5 years later, which suggests that they either died out, evolved into something else, or were just not seen by the Resistance. Although not a zombie created as a combination of human and headcrab, during her adventure through the quarantine zone of City 17, Alyx Vance discovered Jeff in an old distillery. Jeff was a zombie that had had a similar affliction to the armored headcrab, in which the parasitic Xenian flora had managed to infect him with their spores. As a result of this fungus, it adapted this hazmat worker's biology and split open his bloated head to form a large mouth with sharp teeth. As the infection continued to adapt him, his fingers grew out similar to a headcrab zombie, and huge growths grew on his skin. Due to this, the parasite that controlled Jeff became highly aggressive. Without eyes, he grew to rely on his excellent hearing to navigate his surroundings and attacked anything that came into contact with him, regardless of whether they were from Earth or Xen. As a symbiote of human and Xenian flora, Jeff was extremely strong and excreted spores and spread them across the distillery. Jeff was not a standard zombie. Currently, he is the only known unfortunate human afflicted by a Xenian floral parasite. Approximately 20 years after the Combine's invasion of planet Earth, the Resistance frequently came across 3 variations of the headcrab: the standard, fast, and poison. The armored and lightning dog have not been documented after this point. The fast variant was once again very similar to the standard headcrab, but as in its name, it was much faster. The Resistance could tell the difference between the standard, as these were slimmer, smoother, and had much longer legs with claws at the end of them. At this point, the quick identification of the subspecies of headcrab could save a life. These headcrabs also appear to be more intelligent than the others, as they planned attacks. With the use of their longer legs, they held onto surfaces and waited for their prey to come to them. This gave them an advantage, as they simply waited for a potential host to walk below, drop down onto their head, and began the process to take over. These were also noted to travel in groups to maximize their efforts to injure or attach to a host. When coupled to a victim, these headcrabs dramatically adjusted the biology of the host even more than the standard headcrab. This change left the host only with their skeletal frame and muscles. This in turn allowed them to move extremely quickly as they climbed buildings, jumped, ran on 4 legs, and howled to alert others of prey. Once again, these traveled in groups to maximize their efforts to take down their prey with their claws. All of this while their host was in excruciating pain. The final known subspecies discovered was the poison headcrab. This variant could be perceived as the most dangerous by far, as it used its fangs to deploy a deadly stream of neurotoxin into its prey. These were identified by the Resistance by their darker skin, hairy legs, and coloured markings similar to that of a spider. To counter this deadly neurotoxin, the Resistance had to rely on antidotes to counter the effects of it. Luckily, these were also noted to be the slowest of all headcrab variants and even gave out a recognizable sound. a rattle, when it spotted a victim. This essentially gave the potential prey who recognized this noise a warning to leave before they were attacked. These were also discovered to be the most intelligent of the headcrab species and actively hunted their prey. They were aware of the dangers of the natural elements, analysed their situation if they were in danger, and if necessary, retreated in order to survive. After they weakened their prey, this variation did just what the others did, became one with a human. However, this connection was slightly different. Their host swelled up and fell victim to multiple poison headcrabs to feed on as they wandered around in pain. Upon discovery of a potential target, the headcrabs would leave the host to poison them. This weakened state then allowed the host to finish off the attack. That was unless they wanted to use the new victim as another host. Although the poison zombie did attempt to strike at foes with its claws, the Resistance theorized that these hosts were used more for a breeding purpose, to lay eggs inside to create more poison headcrabs. This would make sense due to the number of headcrabs attached to the host, but that is just one of the many theories of this complex parasite. As the Resistance grew stronger and recruited more members across the wasteland, the Combine had to become more creative in how they dealt with them. As they continued to explore and analyze the uses of the Xenian creatures that have found themselves on Earth after the Resonance Cascade, they used the headcrabs to create something new: the headcrab shell. This shell was essentially a hollow projectile filled with captured headcrabs that the Combine could send off to Resistance bases to take them out from afar. The best part about this was that when it landed inside of enemy lines, the payload opened and released an infestation of headcrabs. The Headcrab Shell initiative was responsible for not only the fall of some of the Resistance bases across the Underground Railroad, but it was also instrumental in the fall of Ravenholm, once a strong Resistance base reduced to a nightmare town full of zombies. The thought of using these small creatures in general worked for the Combine, as they were able to take out Resistance bases with little effort. Unfortunately, working with creatures like this was still dangerous for them. During the uprising, as the Combine lost control of City 17, some of their human police faction, the Combine Overwatch, also fell prey to their own biological weapons. These Headcrabs Zombies were then referred to by the Resistance as Zombines, modified Combine humans under the control of a headcrab. Instead of desperate pleas for help, those around only heard the ramblings of a broken human through a vocoder. Born from a gonarch, the headcrab came from a faraway world and through many migrations landed on Earth and attempted to live. Although small, they were feared by most of the population of the planet, which was made worse after the Combine used them as biological weapons. The headcrabs went through many variations: standard, armored, lightning dog, fast and poison. The armored was a result of a Xenian fungal infection, but the rest were likely created by the Combine to control humanity. With this many variations out there, what are the chances that evolution created even more dangerous headcrabs that no one has seen yet? The headcrab had two potential paths to go down in their life cycle: continue to grow until they eventually turned into a gonarch to bring more headcrabs into the universe, or find a humanoid and live out the rest of their days as a zombie. It should be noted that the Vortigaunt, another humanoid species, were never shown to fall prey to these parasites. This could have been because they were not compatible, or the Vortigaunt were just too good at defending themselves. Regardless, there are still many questions that plague this parasitic species. Did the Combine really create the new variants? Can all of them grow into gonarchs? And what species did they have on their homeworld that they used as hosts? The headcrab species, as well as the rest of the Half-Life universe, is still full of mystery. maybe one day we will find some answers to these questions. Here we explore in the lore and story behind the Civil Protection. On the 7th hour of the Combine's brutal invasion of planet Earth, they ravaged humanity with their superior technology and war preparation. As Earth's army slowly succumbed to their forces, one man managed to contact the Empire through an unknown method and offered humanity servitude in return for their lives. In response to Dr. Wallace Breen's request, they accepted his offer and later anointed him as Earth's administrator. He had offered submission on behalf of humanity, but there were still some who disagreed with his actions and continued to fight against the new Combine rule. To this, the Combine understood that one man could not control and guide an entire population, and so they needed a way to keep the outliers in line. Over time, the Combine moved the human and Vortigaunt population into Combine-controlled settlements, and to watch over them, they formed the Civil Protection Program, a sort of Combine-led law enforcement for the planet, a system that would allow them to instill even more fear, control, paranoia, and submission into humanity. Within City 17, the Combine took over the many vacant buildings and adapted them for their various goals. One of these buildings was turned into the Overwatch Nexus, the headquarters for all Overwatch forces in the city, where an AI system, simply labelled Overwatch, sent out orders to its units. Regarded by Overwatch as protection or Metro Police, the Combine asked for human volunteers to join them in their efforts to keep control and balance to not only the citizens of City 17, but to every urban area on the planet, where those who came forward will offer benefits and rewards in this dark age for humanity. In these Combine-controlled regions, the human population were held with limited freedom, space, and food. Even their ability to procreate was taken away. City 17 and the rest of the planet was a miserable place, but in the shadows, a secret resistance had formed and was growing slowly. In these dark times, the desperate of humanity jumped at the Combine's offer of a better life, where they signed up to become a part of the Civil Protection. In a more terrifying thought, there were others who actually agreed with and believed in the Combine's agenda and joined the human arm of their army to play their part. As a reward for joining, these volunteers were given additional rations and better living conditions, much nicer than the locations they had been forced to live in. And for those who believed in the Combine agenda, they took advantage of the greatest privilege, power and authority, something that had been completely stripped from them as a result of the invasion, where they became the Combine's police force. Having been given an elevated position in society, they had the choice on how to treat the citizens around them, to be a good cop or a bad cop. In return for these privileges, the Civil Protection followed the orders of the Overwatch, and in addition to these privileges, they were even given additional rewards for completing tasks, one of which overheard from the Overwatch being a non-mechanical reproduction simulation. Although it is unclear what this exactly was, some believe it was sexual in nature. On the flip side, there were also threats given to those who did not perform their duties to an expected standard, where the phrase family cohesion was used to intimidate and threaten the officers, suggesting that the Combine used the family members of these units to force submission. For the members of this group that fulfilled their roles well and aimed to progress their rank in the Civil Protection, there were options available for them, but this came with biological modifications, something that those in this first rank did not have to participate in. Over time, more of the population became desperate with their dire circumstances, where the promise of additional rations forced them to choose between their friends and family or a decent meal. Thus, as more joined the Combine, the human arm of the Combine Empire grew. As members of the Combine Police, these volunteers had to commit acts that would have normally gone against everything they believed in, just so that their lives could be more bearable in a Combine-controlled world. Sent out into the streets of their respective cities, these officers were fitted with uniforms and bulletproof vests to protect them against resistance attacks and the various threats that came from the wasteland. On the back of their collar and on their right armbands, they were also given identification on the location they were stationed in. For example, the unit stationed in City 17 had C-17. By joining the Civil Protection, there was a stigma that came with turning on their own species. Luckily, part of their uniform included a mask. Not only did this conceal their faces from their family, friends, and neighbors that would pass them on the streets, but it also included a vocoder that distorted their voices. Whether the Combine planned for this to be the case is unknown, but it benefited those who went down this path. With these units stationed all over the planet in Combine-controlled settlements, they were set to work in shifts in their respective cities, where their main roles were to patrol and guard crucial areas, look out for any suspicious activities that could interfere with the Combine agenda, and generally keep the peace. But over the years, this had become harder as more and more of humanity and Vortigaunt alike had joined the Resistance. With a growing following and more manpower, they kept the Civil Protection busy and made their roles more dangerous. These activities ranged from raiding and stealing supplies from Combine regions to forming new resistance bases across the wasteland to increase their holding of the land. Something that the Combine and Wallace did not want to happen. So, whenever the Combine, and as such, Overwatch, became aware of any illegal activities, they alerted their Civil Protection officers to raid the homes of those they believed conspired against them, transported them to Combine regions, and tortured them for any information they had about the Resistance movement. To do this, the Civil Protection, or labelled by the Resistance, the CP, were given the equipment they needed to perform their duties. Throughout City 17 and the other cities across the wasteland, the officers made use of scanners and directed them to wander the streets and capture the faces of the residents. From these, if needed, they could view these images within their masks so that they knew exactly who they were looking for if ordered. As the Civil Protection all followed the orders of Overwatch, their masks were equipped with radios so that they could receive their orders directly from her artificial voice. These orders came in the form of codes where, over time, the Resistance discovered at least 59 of these codes. These ranged from the standard 10-4, which meant affirmative, to clean out, which meant a mass murder had taken place. In addition to their radios, these masks were also fitted with an air filter that protected their lungs from any dangerous fumes, and night vision activation to navigate darker environments. With these enhancements, the Civil Protection essentially had no excuse for failing an order. Although their jobs at this low rank were not considered incredibly dangerous, the Civil Protection were armed with a stun baton and a 9mm pistol so that they could take on a situation if needed. If challenged by the Resistance in larger groups, they were trained to work together to take them down. In these situations, they made use of one of the Combine's most unique weapons, the Viscerator, or labelled the Manhack by humanity. These flying shredders were perfectly crafted to seek out targets and tear them apart, and as such, complemented the Civil Protection perfectly as they attempted to take down Resistance activity in their city. In the strict Combine-controlled territories, the humans were ultimately harmless,
But if the Civil Protection came up against more of a threat than they could handle, some made use of MP7s, or higher-ranked Combine units were sent in to take out the threat. In these rare occasions, the Civil Protection relied on support from the firepower in the armoured personnel carriers they used to navigate their city. Flare guns to bring in additional support, anti-fatigue medication to keep them alert, and with resistant members to a more dangerous degree, they made use of mounted weaponry and even requested the assistance of hunter choppers. As time passed under this regime, the citizens of City 17 and the other cities feared the Civil Protection units in the streets. For some of these units, they simply sought a more comfortable life for themselves, while others relished in their newfound power to the point where they randomly searched citizens without cause, ordered them to complete mundane tasks for their enjoyment, and others just beat up citizens for no apparent reason because they could. In essence, the Civil Protection units were disposable to the Combine, like all of their units, and as such, they installed a device in the unit's armor to monitor their heart rate. If they flatlined, a loud noise would wail out into the surrounding area, alerting the other teammates in the region of an officer's death and the location they had fallen in. Essentially, where the death of a unit was designed to aid the rest of the team. Although the Civil Protection used the radios to stay in contact with each other and Overwatch, this noise from the radio often gave away their location to any target they were hunting down, and as such, set them at a disadvantage as their position was given away, increasing their chance of dying. For the Civil Protection units who performed well in their roles and wanted additional privileges, power, and generally for the Combine to succeed in their reign of the planet, the Combine did have options available to rank up in their army. This was not just a mere promotion, but it was also a taxing procedure on the body, a conversion from Civil Protection Officer to Overwatch Soldier and then Overwatch Elite. In this procedure, those who volunteered had their memories adapted and in some cases replaced, as well as further modifications to their bodies. The first step in becoming a synthetic being for the Combine, and as the years passed under the Combine rule, more volunteers joined this growing army in return for rewards and favor from the Combine, at the cost of their morality and humanity. Moving forward 20 years after the initial invasion, the Civil Protection had a strong hold over the cities of planet Earth, but the resistance had been growing in the shadows, just waiting for their time to strike. Unknown to the Civil Protection in City 17, the resistance had managed to infiltrate their ranks with undercover agents, where they secured as much information as possible. With this, they prepared for upcoming raids, had access to security cameras, learned how prisoners were actually treated when in the custody of the Combine, and essentially were able to keep one step ahead of the Combine. As more battles between the Civil Protection and the Resistance were fought, the Resistance took the armor and weaponry of the fallen members of the Civil Protection to protect them in further conflicts. Although regarded as the mere grunts of the Combine control of these cities, they were still essential in the day-to-day control of the Combine-controlled settlements. That was until the Resistance eventually decided to strike back with full force. On a standard day in City 17, the Civil Protection were informed by Overwatch of a high-priority citizen that needed to be captured, Anti-Citizen 1. Dr. Gordon Freeman. Not only were these units ordered to look out for him, but the Citadel was also put on high alert, where additional Combine technology and units were sent out to find this great threat to the Combine's occupation of Earth. On one occasion, the Civil Protection were extremely close to catching this threat, where he was spotted inside of a residential building in City 17. But unfortunately,
Many of the civilians in the building helped him escape the grasp of the officers. There were even 4 units who came close to apprehending him, but they were ambushed by the daughter of the resistance leader, Alyx Vance. Over the following days, Gordon and the leaders of the resistance stormed City 17, which left the civil protection to struggle to keep control. So, Overwatch soldiers were sent in to fix the situation. During this tumultuous siege, these Overwatch units also failed in their goal, and Gordon managed to not only infiltrate the Citadel, but he also destroyed the Dark Fusion reactor at the top of the structure. At this point, it was clear that the Combine had lost control of City 17, but the Combine overlords had other plans. It was at this moment that the Resistance believed that many members of the Civil Protection began to have second thoughts about defending the city. Many of the Civil Protection had chosen to join for an easier life, but now it appeared that the Resistance actually had a chance to reclaim their planet. Regardless, the soldiers who believed in the Combine's propaganda and vision continued to fight for them, even though they had been ordered to overload the Citadel core so that it would explode. An explosion that would not only level City 17, but also start the formation of a superportal so that reinforcements could re-enter Earth and take back control. Within the exit points of the city, the Civil Protection fought with the Resistance, who were fighting to lead the city's remaining refugees onto trains to escape the blast of the eventual fall of the Citadel. While many believe these officers were simply following their orders to stop the Resistance from growing even stronger, there were others who believed these Civil Protection officers were merely attempting to take the trains for themselves to escape the blast. Following the fall of City 17, the surviving C-17 Civil Protection units no longer had a city to defend, but across the wasteland, the other Combine-controlled settlements, City 10, 11, 12, and so on, still had their protection, and just maybe, they would be more successful in fighting back against Resistance activities or other threats when they would eventually come. The Civil Protection was implemented to keep the Resistance of humanity in line, so that the Combine could complete their goals on planet Earth without chaos. Although these unmodified officers made the lives of the population of their respective cities hell, these people were also human. With the fall of the Citadel, these soldiers now have a choice to renounce their ties to the Combine and help their own species, or for those that align their values with the Combine, they will have a tough fight ahead against a growing Resistance. The majority chose to join the Civil Protection for improved living conditions and food, a desperate choice for a better life that came at the cost of betraying their own species. While many may look down on these, this situation is something that will quite possibly never happen in our own world, hopefully. But I do ask, if you were put into this situation of fear and doubt, would you join the Civil Protection at the risk of losing everyone around you for an easier life? Or would you fight with the Resistance to claim back your planet? In this video, we explore the lore and story behind Jeff. We all know the story of the invasion of Earth. The Combine Empire conquered the planet in a mere 7 hours and spent the subsequent decade keeping humanity in line through many barbaric acts. The Combine were a mighty and powerful force, and with their power and aim to control the human population, they constructed settlements across the planet to keep a close eye on them and break them down. While the development and construction of these settlements did allow the Combine the ability to monitor humanity, These enclosed regions also offered them another advantage. The portal storms that had allowed the Combine to conquer the planet also brought through other creatures from other planets. Each of these creatures also wanted to claim Earth for themselves, and some were very territorial. So the settlements protected humanity and the Combine units from the wasteland, as the many deadly creatures between the settlement claimed it for themselves. Although the Combine were a strong force, they too struggled to contain Zen's population. Antlines dug deep underground and built nests. They also ventured into regions off limits to them. To counter this, thumpers were installed that agitated their sensitive ability to detect vibrations, and headcrabs were noted to find themselves in the settlements in the search of a humanoid host to control. Overall, the Combine did a good job to keep these hostiles out through the use of their armed guards and technology. Within the settlements, the human population lived in fear by design to keep them compliant. They were monitored constantly, their food was restricted, and raids of their homes offered severe punishment if they were found in possession of contraband. A resistance did form in these early years, but if these thoughts of an uprising or action to rebel were discovered by the Combine, they were given the most inhumane punishment: a trip to Nova Prospekt and turned into a stalker to work as a mindless machine for their oppressors. On the other hand, the Combine offered their newly conquered population a way to live a more comfortable life, a way to join the human arm of the Combine Empire in return for better housing, treatment, privileges, and additional food rations. The most documented position available was a place in the Combine's police force, the Civil Protection. There were, however, many other positions that the Combine hoped to fill in order for their settlement to run smoothly without issue. Within Eastern Europe, in the settlement of City 17, the Combine encountered a problem. They had attempted to control the spread of Xenian flora and fauna, but even their best efforts had failed. An entire region of City 17 slowly fell to an outbreak of alien origin, filled with dangerous and unpredictable plant life and hostile creatures. The Combine decided to seal off this section of the city in order to protect themselves and the rest of City 17. In order to deal with this problem in the quarantine zone and similar issues across the wasteland, the Combine offered a new role to those who would accept it: the role of a hazmat worker as a member of Infestation Control to remove and incinerate all traces of the Xenian infestation to stop the spread. Around 15 years after the Combine's arrival on Earth, through choice or punishment, several hazmat workers were sent out into the quarantine zone to clear out a distillery that had become home to a new Xenian infestation. Unknown to them, they would never return home. As the workers arrived at the Golden Line distillery, the hazmat workers installed quarantine force field checkpoints, prepared a cleanup solution, and began their work. They believed that these force fields would stop the spread of the Xenian vegetation, but they were so wrong. Within the tight hallways, Xen coffers launched out fungal spores out into the air in order to spread further into the region. Xen snappers bit at anything that came close to them. Barnacles latched onto the ceilings and waited for their next meal, and bulbous pustules leaked onto the ground. This was not the plant life humanity had on Earth. This was aggressive, and it wanted to feed and spread. This region alone was dangerous. The spores alone, when inhaled, allowed the spread and growth of seedlings. To protect themselves from this, their hazard suits had an air filtration system with an independent air supply. This should have been enough to protect them from these dangers, or so they thought. During their time here, something went very wrong. A hazmat worker's suit could have been penetrated by a snapper, or even a headcrab in the vicinity could have attacked them.
Regardless of how it happened, one of these workers was infected by the fungal spore of a Zen coffer. Inside of him, the parasitic seedling began to grow. Some time later, the awful aftermath of this deadly infection was discovered by a human scavenger called Larry. The Zenian infestation had spread across into the entire distillery. The force fields had not stopped the spread, and only one of the hazmat workers stood. But he was different. From above, Larry observed this worker, and he called him Jeff. As of now, his real name is unknown. From observation, it appears that everything went wrong just after the parasitic infection entered Jeff's system. As it began to adapt his physiology, Jeff would have noticed this instantly. His body had become host to new life that did not care about what happened to him. His body became bloated and swollen as additional skin grew and absorbed his hazmat suit. His new and old skin hardened and formed a natural protective barrier. His right arm bloated into a battering ram, and Zen coffers grew out of his back. Jeff's co-workers would have of course noticed these changes. However, by the time Larry discovered Jeff, he saw just how aggressive he had become. It is very likely that as each of the hazmat workers discovered the changes that had happened to Jeff, he reacted with rage and took them out, their bodies scattered all across the distillery. What Jeff had encountered so far would have been terrifying, yet the pain and torture was not over. This parasitic infection still had changes to make to his body. The worst part about this infection occurred on Jeff's head. Through what can only be described as the worst pain imaginable, Jeff's head split into two separate pieces, and in between them formed a mouth with rows of teeth. Inside of this mouth, another mouth formed with another row of teeth. He had essentially become the human equivalent of a Venus flytrap. His new head also resembled the snappers that lined the walls of this graveyard. From this concept art, it is very likely that Jeff was completely aware of what had happened to him, and he was still conscious, but he was no longer in control. The fungal infection was. All he could do was call for help, just like the human hosts that had fallen victim to a headcrab. Aware of their situation, unable to do anything about it. All alone, the infection continued to take hold of Jeff as he was used to spread the Zenian infestation. As he wandered the Golden Lion distillery, his spores spread out into the environment. The quarantine force fields were designed to stop the spread. Jeff, however, still had his keycard on his body that allowed him to wander throughout the region without issue. Although he was in an incredible amount of pain, the changes that the infection had done to his body also left him almost invulnerable to any damage. The pain also kept him in a constant agitated and alert state. His co-workers were dead, but he was not alone. Barnacles formed on the ceiling, and headcrabs occasionally entered this bleak region. Despite this apparent danger, these were not an issue for him. The mutilation of his head had left him blind, but his hearing had improved exponentially, and even the slightest noise allowed him to pinpoint the location of any intruder in his new home. To protect himself and claim his territory, the fungus evolved its host and gave Jeff the ability to create a dark, toxic substance to launch at any who encountered him. He had become a mobile seed spreader, unable to control his own actions. This poor hazmat worker had just wanted to have an easier life on a Combine-occupied Earth, but fate had given him an existence worse than death. Within the distillery, Larry watched Jeff from above and observed his actions and reaction to the smallest noise. Jeff was in pain and lashed out at anything that came close to him. It was clear that Jeff was a human that had fallen victim to an infection. All Larry had to do was stay quiet in order not to startle this victim of circumstance. Although Larry was very careful to avoid the attention of Jeff, he failed to notice the tongue of a barnacle. To his luck, a young Alyx Vance arrived in the distillery just in time on her way to the vault. In the distance, she heard the rambles of Larry as he contemplated how to get out of this situation. With her great aim, Alyx shot the barnacle and released the scavenger, and in return, he offered her everything he knew about Jeff. In essence, he warned her that Jeff had excellent hearing and would rip her apart if he caught her. As she reached the ground floor of the distillery, Alyx avoided anything that would make a noise, and she also covered her mouth to avoid the inhalation of spores and the chance that they too would turn her into a new host. Alyx had encountered many zombies on her journey through the quarantine zone, but Jeff was different. He was in a lot of pain, but she had to pass him to continue on with her journey. A journey to aid the resistance and strengthen their forces. To navigate the Xenian-infested hallways, Alyx made use of the breakable objects in this enclosed region. This had once been a distillery and had tons of bottles of vodka scattered around. The perfect object to launch into another area to distract Jeff. With each smash, Jeff exploded with rage and explored the area for his prey as Alyx worked her way further in. Eventually, Alyx successfully reached the exit of the distillery and discovered a walk-in trash compactor. With this, she had an idea of how to remove the threat of Jeff. Once again, she led Jeff through the distillery and into the trash compactor. And here, she had a difficult choice to make. This game of cat and mouse had been one of the most stressful and scary experiences Alyx had ever faced, but it was not Jeff's fault. He was also a victim. She could either leave him to live out the rest of his days in the trash compactor, or activate the machine and put him out of his misery. Regardless of the choice she made, Alyx ventured on towards the vault and left her nightmare encounter in the Golden Line Distillery behind her. This encounter, and generally just the existence of Jeff, opens up the terrifying thought that more of humanity may have fallen victim to this parasitic fungal infection. An infection that transformed a human into a monster, a living human Venus flytrap, always angry, always agitated. The Stalkers have often been cited as the worst thing that could happen to a human. Yet, at least they were conditioned to accept their situation, unaware of what they once were. Jeff and anyone else that fell victim to this same infection were aware of what had happened to them, always in pain, truly living a nightmare. Jeff, or whatever his real name was, is just another one of the many victims of the Combine Empire. Although indirect, they put him in the situation he was in. This truly was a fate worse than death.
Here we explore in the lore and story behind Dr. Wallace Breen. Way back before the Combine invasion, the Black Mesa Research Facility was home to the brightest minds humanity had to offer. Located within the New Mexico desert, this top-secret complex sought to expand and understand the vast universe around them using the advanced technology available to them. With the complex split into different sectors, each committed to studying their own scientific field and functioning of the facility, the dedicated scientists all answered to one person, the administrator of Black Mesa, Dr. Wallace Breen. Within Sector C of this complex, the anomalous materials team were tasked with analysing exotic crystals taken from a border world called Zen. Using an anti-mass spectrometer, The team would agitate the exotic matter within these crystals just enough with beams of energy to create displacement energy. From here, the team could then study and analyze these displacement fields. Over time, this strong team functioned well under the administration of Wallace. 4 well-known members of this team being Dr. Eli Vance, Dr. Isaac Kleiner, Dr. Arnie Magnuson, and Dr. Gordon Freeman. Working in close proximity to his team, he befriended them and became well acquainted with their lives and family. As time passed, the anomalous materials team were given yet another Xenian crystal sample, GG-3883, only this one came with pressure from Wallace. He asked that the team get him a conclusive analysis of the sample and to go outside of the standard testing procedures to attain it. It is unknown what great length Breen had taken to obtain this sample, but many now speculate he was given it by a mysterious government man who had been spotted on the premises that day. Noted to have been acting strangely during this day, Wallace ignored the fears of the scientists that warned of a resonance cascade occurring if the anti-mass spectrometer were to be used outside of the standard testing parameters. Despite this, he instructed them to boost the machine to 105%. As the unstable crystal hit the beam, it shattered, flooding the test chamber with exotic matter, triggering a resonance cascade, ripping open an interdimensional rift between Earth and Xen. From here, portal storms ravaged Black Mesa and the rest of the planet, where many died to the Xenian lifeforms that had come here to form a new home. Within the facility, Wallace managed to escape the onslaught of Vortigaunt, Headcrab, and other dangerous creatures that would pose a threat. It is further speculated that Breen was recruited by the G-Man to pull off this entire situation, as he was the only person with clearance high enough to set the parameters for this experiment and ignore the warning of the scientists, and aware of what was to come, he could escape with ease. Regardless of whether the speculation is true or not, Wallace managed to escape Black Mesa safely, but the Xenian invasion was just the beginning of what was to come. Over the following hours, Dr. Gordon Freeman stopped the resonance cascade, but he had disappeared during the event. Not many knew where he was now, but from later statements made by Breen, he at least had an idea. With Earth's armies now fighting the influx of creatures that had now made their way to Earth from Xen, they became weaker and weaker. Jumping from universe to universe, the Universal Union, also known as the Combine, had become aware of Earth's presence following the events of the Resonance Cascade. The portal storms that ravaged the planet would also give them easy access to the entire planet if they decided to conquer it. And they did. Having conquered and brutally assimilated countless species into their armies at this point, humanity would be just another species to adapt to strengthen their union. As the Combine struck, all of Earth's armies began to struggle, taking mass casualties only hours into the war. It was clear that humanity may have met its match. Watching this occur, Wallace discovered a way to communicate with the invaders through an unknown method. Upon contacting the United Nations, Wallace was given permission to communicate with and negotiate a peace deal at any cost. The Combine had intended to conquer the planet and its population in its entirety, but humanity was different to the other races they had brutalized. As Wallace opened a dialogue, he offered a multinational surrender on behalf of the whole of humanity in return for their survival, believing this to be the only course of action available. In essence, saving them from mutilation and death in return for their freedom. To this, the Combine agreed to the terms, and on the 7th hour of this war, they stopped their assault and mankind submitted. As the Combine began a new phase in their acquisition of Earth, they rounded up its population into urban settlements where they could be controlled and monitored. Now seen as an established spokesperson for humanity, the Combine chose Wallace to become their puppet, to hold humanity accountable for their actions to keep this agreement in place. With this, they gave Breen the official role of Interim Administrator of Earth. Although Wallace had saved his species by negotiating this deal with the Combine Empire, believing this to be the only course of action for mankind's survival, many of his race accused him of rank opportunity and selling out his own race in return for favor with the alien empire. With his new role to keep humanity in line, Wallace became infamous, but as a puppet spokesperson for the Combine, he appeared on magazines, television, and newspapers justifying his decision to the masses. He explained that he was a scientist and not a politician. He had only looked at the data available and made a decision based on what he perceived to be the best outcome. He had saved his species from total annihilation, but at the cost of their respect. Over the years, the Combine became more acquainted with planet Earth and subsequently made adjustments to the planet to make their occupation as seamless as possible. The Empire installed a suppression field across the planet to stop pregnancy from occurring to control the population, and began to administer a memory-altering substance to the water supply. If humanity forgot why they hated the Combine, then surely they would become more submissive to them. With unrest to all of these changes, Wallace was moved to City 17 by the Combine, where they gave him a home in the Citadel, a main base of operations for the Combine, to set up his administration. Reporting to Combine advisors, Breen would spread their propaganda using Breencasts, recording these from his office, where they would then be played to the human population. He would address the concerns of mankind in an attempt to keep them compliant, reading out questions supposedly sent to him by concerned citizens. Whether the population actually wrote these questions, or whether this was another tactic to spread Combine propaganda, is unknown. While attempting to be as vague as possible to quell these concerns, he would always refer back to how their benefactors, the Universal Union, knew what was best for humanity. In the case of the suppression field, he explained that this had been put in place to teach mankind to ignore their most basic urges to evolve, and that their benefactors would help them grow as a species instead, even mentioning the possibility of immortality with the right technology. All humanity had to do was comply and submit to their rulers as they knew best. It seemed that Breen truly believed that a collaboration with this multi-universal faction would aid humanity's progress in unlocking the universe. All he had to do was control the enslaved population using whatever methods he deemed necessary, even the torture and death of his own kind for non-compliance. With tough rules, basic rations, and constant surveillance, some of humanity even chose to join the Combine Overwatch, the Combine's military and law enforcement on Earth, in return for better rations and treatment. Also overseen by Breen, at its lowest level, its members would have their memories and minds altered. As they progressed through their ranks, they were adapted to become the perfect soldier for the Combine Empire. With Breen mostly in control of the general population under him, he also had to deal with a forming resistance against the Combine that grew stronger every day. As administrator, he decreed that any who chose to go against his plan for mankind and their benefactors would suffer a fate worse than death. Led by Dr. Eli Vance, a surviving member of the anomalous materials team in Black Mesa, the resistance actively attempted to get in the way of Combine activity, recruit new members, and maybe one day rid the planet from the Combine Empire. Having had Dr. Breen as his boss back during his days at Black Mesa, Eli held strong disdain towards this man, believing him to be the administrator of this vile business. Eli had been warned during the Black Mesa incident to prepare for unforeseen consequences by the mysterious government man wandering the facility that day, but his concerns had been ignored by Wallace, and he had been told to continue regardless. With growing resistance activity, Breen would speak out against their work through broadcasts. Following this, his Overwatch forces would conduct regular raids on those suspected of being part of the resistance, where brutal interrogations would follow in an attempt to gather more information. Although the resistance did cause issues for him from time to time, Wallace had a secret weapon. He had managed to recruit Dr. Judith Mossman, a member of the resistance, as a double spy. Using her knowledge of the resistance and her bright mind, he could capture more resistance members as well as help the Combine with a problem they had. Even though the Combine had been able to jump from universe to universe with their advanced technology, they had not been able to master in-universe teleportation, but humanity had. With Aperture locked down and Black Mesa destroyed, Wallace could rely on Judith to use her insight with the resistance members that had worked with and understood this form of teleportation, and in turn, he could use her to work on a teleporter for the Combine. To this, Judith began to help develop a teleporter using resistance knowledge within Nova Prospekt, a terrifying Combine prison where awful things happened to those who opposed the Combine. With humanity under his control, the resistance being hunted, and in-universe teleportation being developed that would help the Combine conquer sentient life at a faster rate, Wallace truly was in a great position. But one man would come along, and everything he had worked for would slowly begin to fail. On a standard day in City 17, Breen sat in his office and looked up to discover Dr. Gordon Freeman materializing before him, before suddenly vanishing. Gordon had been missing for 20 years after disappearing during the Resonance Cascade. For all the Resistance knew, Gordon had either died during his time in Zen, or he had not got out of Black Mesa in time before its destruction. But Breen was almost sure of Gordon's fate and where he had been. Aware that this long-lost, unaged member of the Anomalous Materials team now appeared to be a pawn to a higher power, Breen instantly makes contact with a Combine advisor to let them know of his return. The Combine knew of the G-Man and his employers. Whenever they would resurface, something big was about to happen. Gordon could be a signal for the Resistance movement, and if he were to help them, Breen's hold over humanity would suffer. With this fear, Wallace places the Citadel on high alert, naming Gordon as Anti-Citizen number 1 and sends out his Overwatch soldiers to contain the problem. Over the following days, Judith informs Wallace that Gordon had made contact with the Resistance and that he was on his way to a secret base on the outskirts of City 17, this one led by his old employee, Dr. Eli Vance. Having volunteered this information, Judith asks Wallace to wait for her signal before bringing Gordon in, with her main priority being to allow Eli to continue his work without interruption. Due to the pressure of his Combine leaders, against the wishes of Judith, Wallace decides to order a raid on Black Mesa East in the hopes to capture Gordon. Unfortunately, Gordon escapes, but his soldiers do capture Eli, where they send him to the Combine's brutal prison, Nova Prospekt. Although he had upset his double spy, the capture of Eli was exactly what Wallace needed to display his dedication to the Combine cause, but this would only cause him more problems. He begins to hear reports of the death of his Combine forces and destruction of technology over the wasteland as Gordon travels across it. Gordon had become the free man, the person that would lead the way for the Resistance, where humanity could rise up and fight against their oppressors. All Wallace needed to do was take out Gordon, and hopefully, their revolution would die with him. As the hunt continues, Wallace becomes aware of an attack on Nova Prospekt by Gordon and Alyx, who had travelled to the prison to free Eli. And so, his Overwatch soldiers attempt to contain the problem. During this altercation, Alyx and Gordon become aware of Judith's betrayal. To evade this situation, Judith uses the teleporter within the facility to escape with Eli to the Citadel to safety, under Breen's protection. As this teleporter was still in development, it becomes unstable and explodes, destroying the facility with it. Over the next week, many begin to believe that Gordon and Alyx had died during this explosion, but this did not stop the revolution. The Resistance instead took the destruction of Nova Prospekt, a Combine stronghold, as a signal to rebel. Over this week, the Resistance take over City 17, marching towards the Citadel, growing stronger each day. This only became worse when Gordon is later spotted alive and well, fighting with them, leading the charge. Taking his frustration to a Breencast, he asks how a simple, theoretical physicist had not been caught by his elite forces. The Combine had severely questioned him for his role in this, and in turn, he asks his Overwatch soldiers how they had failed him so badly. Furthermore, he fears that if the Combine were now to question the value of this agreement with humanity, would they still uphold it or simply choose to exterminate instead? As Gordon marches towards the Citadel, Breen becomes even more concerned, now addressing Freeman personally through public Breencasts. He accuses him of throwing away all of the progress that the Combine had brought humanity, that the revolution would only lead to the death and limitation for mankind, leaving it to plunge into freefall. Continuing to push that humanity needed the Combine in order to survive and grow, in a last-ditch effort, he pleads with Gordon to help him gain back humanity's trust for the Combine by surrendering. Ignoring Breen's requests, Gordon marches to the Citadel with the growing Resistance members, taking the city by force, hoping to free Eli and a newly captured Alyx. Over time, Freeman enters the Citadel, and during his time inside, he somehow traps himself inside of a Combine detainment cell, now en route to Breen's office. Now with Gordon, Eli, and Alyx in his capture, he could breathe a sigh of relief. In his victory, Breen berates and mocks his captives. In return, Eli accuses him of indescribable evil, genocide, and that what he had done to humanity was simply beyond words. Regardless of this, Breen orders Eli to tell the Resistance to stop their fight, but he refuses. To this, still attempting to control the situation, Wallace resorts to threatening Eli's daughter, Alyx, if he does not step up and do the right thing, in his eyes, for the future of humanity. Aware of Gordon's services being useful to those that controlled him, at this time, currently the G-Man, Breen sees value in Gordon's skill set. In his words, a fine pawn whose services would be open to the highest bidder. With Eli refusing to do anything for Breen or the Combine, the Administrator then threatens the Resistance leader with off-planet relocation on the Combine overworld. With this, Judith calls out Wallace. He had agreed not to harm Eli, but now he was going back on their deal to acquire a better one with the Combine. Speaking down to Judith, he explains that she was bright enough to finish the work herself, and she only wanted Eli to stay safe because she had feelings for him. It is unknown if he truly cared for Judith, or whether he had just used her like he had done with the rest of his species. In frustration, Judith decides to turn on Wallace. With his manipulation, he attempts to convince her to stop, but she had finally found her voice. Using Alyx's multi-tool, Judith frees the prisoners and locks the door to the office, stopping Breen's personal guards from entering. In this chaos, and feeling betrayed by Judith, he picks up Gordon's supercharged anti-gravity gun and fires. With everyone around him disorientated, he makes his way for the elevator to escape. On his way up, Breen thinks about all the Resistance members waiting just outside of the Citadel, ready to storm it and take him out. Trapped, he contacts a Combine advisor where he asks for safe passage from the Citadel. In response, the advisor offers him a host body on the Combine homeworld, to which at first he asks to be sent elsewhere. However, with Gordon and Alyx on his tail, he accepts. All he needed to do was reach the portal. As the portal opens and Breen rides the lift up to it, Gordon takes it upon himself to stop the interim administrator from escaping. Slowly ascending with the high-tech elevator, Breen mocks and continues to explain that humanity needs the Combine as Gordon fires energy pellets at the dark fusion reactor powering the portal. And then, boom. With a giant explosion, the dark fusion reactor lets out a huge wave of energy, destroying everything around it, closing the portal to the Combine overworld, dropping Breen into the depths of the Citadel below. As he falls, he shouts to Gordon, the man that had caused him all of this trouble, his final words being, "You need me." Having fallen so far since his initial attempt to save humanity from extinction at the hands of the Combine Empire, Wallace Breen had lost his way, and now his fate is unknown. Although he had fallen into the depths of the Citadel below, throughout his life, Breen had shown his ability to adapt and survive in the worst circumstances. Furthermore, each time, he had leveraged these situations to barter himself a better position than he had been in before. He had managed to become the head of one of the world's leading scientific corporations, survived its disaster, and then became a representative for humanity. Was Wallace truly a bad person, or simply doing his best to save his species from extinction, no matter the cost? What is known is that he did see a bright future for humanity's evolution with the help of the Combine, but his vision was not shared by the rest of his species. If Breen's plan were to succeed, humanity could have essentially become immortal, stronger, and more efficient with Combine technology, but this would have come with the cost of what it meant to be human. If Breen is dead, few will mourn his passing, but his fall was just another domino in the Resistance's effort to remove the Combine occupation from planet Earth. Here we explore in the lore behind the Combine's brutal prison, Nova Prospekt. Way before Nova Prospekt became known across the wasteland as a place to be feared, the location was home to a high-security prison controlled and monitored by the human population to hold those that have been convicted of serious crimes. Located within a coastal region, many miles away from any city or community, this prison on top of a large cliff not only allowed those within to feel isolated away from any society, but also the high walls and vast lands surrounding the region would make it difficult for any to escape successfully without being caught in the secluded coast by the prison guard after the extremely loud alarms would blast across the entire prison region. On top of this, the guards also had an easy view over the courtyard of the prison where they could look down from their 3 watchtowers that not only allowed them to monitor their inmates, but also any suspicious activity over the wall. Composed of 12 observable cell blocks, the prisoners of Nova Prospekt lived in a strict, regulated life away from those they had once cared about in the mundane, heavily monitored long hallways of Nova Prospekt. But their freedom would soon come in the following years, where it would make the prisoners think back positively about how they had once lived in the prison. With a cell to house each prisoner, showers to clean them, maintenance facilities such as washing and drying of clothing, offices for the guards to observe their prisoners, and solitary confinement cells to punish those for breaking the rules, the prison had all it needed to successfully control the inmates and keep it running efficiently. With the prison having become fairly functional without the need for outside resources, kept away from the rest of the world by a giant cliff and a mass amount of land around it, what could go wrong? Deep within the New Mexico desert, an experiment performed by a top-secret research facility went terribly wrong. The aftermath of this disastrous experiment resulted in a resonance cascade where a hole was ripped between planet Earth and a border world called Zen. Although the resonance cascade was later reversed, this event had alerted the presence of planet Earth and its population to the multi-dimensional alien empire now known as the Combine. Upon waging war on the planet, the Combine used their advanced technologies to conquer the planet in a mere 7 hours. On this 7th hour, an ambassador of Earth submitted to the dominating multi-dimensional alien empire on behalf of humanity in return for their submission. Over time, the Combine scoured the planet for any natural and any technological resource they could use, not only to continue to control humanity, but also to add to the armies that would continue to conquer the other unfortunate civilizations within the multiverse. As the Combine began to tackle each region of the planet, they moved the human population into constructed settlements where they could monitor and control the lesser species within. For those lucky enough to have been hidden away from the major cities of Earth, the resistant members of the population came across a now abandoned Nova Prospekt prison, likely in the hopes they would not be discovered there. Here, they would graffiti early resistance propaganda on the walls, which in turn would alert any passing member of a resistance against the Combine of other humans in the region that had also evaded and survived the initial wave of the Combine invasion. Unfortunately for these poor members, the Combine did eventually discover Nova Prospekt, and after countless invasions of countless species, they saw value in this heavily fortified and secluded location on a cliff. With a perfect, human-built structure at their disposal, they began to transform this place, once created to hold the less desirable members of humanity, into a place of horror, a place where any human that heard the name Nova Prospekt would rather die than enter. With the Combine having access to advanced technology far beyond that of humanity, they got right to work adapting the prison to their needs. With this, they moved in their units to protect the location from interference from any that would come to the prison. Alongside these units, the Combine stationed human-assimilated Combine prison guards. Over time, sections of the prison were transformed using advanced technology to meet the Combine's needs. Here, the adapted areas of Nova Prospekt were installed with Combine prison cells constructed with the intent to hold any prisoners deemed to be a threat to the Combine cause. At the back of the prison, the Combine constructed the depot. Inside of this newly built advanced addition to Nova Prospekt, the Combine now had a place where they could store their technologies as their advanced machinery slowly transformed the rest of the prison into a usable space, adding their cold, metallic blue material to the facility. With the minimum necessary adjustments made to the prison, the Combine opened up Nova Prospekt to serve its purpose. 20 years after their initial invasion of planet Earth, it was observed that the depot covered the regions of Cell Block C1 well into Cell Block D8, a vast construction spanning many cell blocks, and this area would be capable of many horrors in the near future. Within the depot, the Combine had constructed a train station. Here, they could use their large railway network to transport any resistance members, troublemakers, and generally any who posed a problem to the Combine. With train stations within the major settlements across the planet, the Combine could bring in prisoners through the use of razor trains with ease. Now with plenty of storage to house their prisoners across Nova Prospekt, the guards would torture those unlucky enough to have been captured for information using brutal methods, keep them locked in small pods, and there was even a fate for those that the Combine deemed to be extremely volatile, a fate worse than death. With their ability to essentially recycle anything they came across, the Combine had developed a process to transform their prisoners into creatures known as Stalkers. Using their specially built machines, the Combine had found a way to adapt the human body to its bare essentials to exist, taking away all of the parts not required to function. After this, the mutated bodies would then be mentally adapted to not only follow the orders of the Combine, but where they would also become a major asset in major Combine facilities, a cursed existence to essentially continue on as a living piece of machinery for the needs of the Combine. After their transformation, the Stalkers were then guided to the train station, stored, and then deployed all over the wasteland to follow the orders of their Combine overlords. It was even believed by Resistance members that the privilege of becoming a Stalker was reserved for the unfortunate members of the Resistance that had been caught during their attempts to stand up against the dominating force. Although becoming a Stalker in itself was a terrifying fate to the members of the Resistance, it was also said that Nova Prospekt was also used to transform their other prisoners into new soldiers, mentally conditioned to fight for the Combine, and other various synthetic husks to live the rest of their days in servitude. Further within the depot, over the years, the Combine had been attempting to discover the secret to teleportation from one point to another within a single universe. Although they had mastered the ability to jump from one universe to another, they still struggled with discovering how intra-universal travel worked, a secret that Black Mesa, the Resistance, and even Aperture Science had discovered already. With this, they constructed a large tunneling device using a pulse-forming network. If they could simply discover the workings of in-universe teleportation, they could grow even faster and add to their ever-growing empire. As this location was seen as a hardpoint for the Combine across the wasteland, and with the value that Nova Prospekt now held to the alien empire, the adapted regions of the facility were installed with high-tech force field gates to seal off areas from those unauthorized to be within them. To control these, the Combine constructed advanced terminals to adapt and lock them down. As the Combine continued to bring in prisoners and use them for their nefarious goal, the moving walls of the prison adaptation technology slowly made its way through the facility, transforming the old architecture, broken furniture, and arrangement of Nova Prospekt into a new structure to make room for more prisoners, store more Combine technology, and allow the alien empire to make Nova Prospekt an extremely important location in the holding of planet Earth. With many holding cells scattered across the facility at this point, mostly in the D7 cell block, the Combine had also created a large storage vault near to the D8 cell block section. Here, hundreds of Combine cells held many inmates simply waiting to be interrogated. These were believed to have consisted of political prisoners, the worst of humanity in the Combine's view, and members of the Resistance that had openly fought against the alien force. Although a large number of prisoners would allow the Combine to acquire as much information as they could against those that opposed them, this also worked against them, as the captured Vortigaunt were able to send information about Nova Prospekt to the free members of their species using their connection to the Vortessence. With each Vortigaunt that was able to send through their impression and memories of Nova Prospekt, their collective transmissions would give the Resistance a great idea of the layout of the facility, what it wanted from the inmates, and how the Combine worked. With each prison cell connected to a line, the Combine unit would use command consoles within access points across the facility to call upon the trapped prisoners, similar to that of the system within the Citadel in City 17. This not only allowed the guards to perform their jobs with ease, but also to reduce the risk of the inmates within the pods escaping. With additional security in mind, it was noted that on the beach surrounding the prison, the Combine had built stations across the visible coast, allowing the soldiers to observe any oncoming for miles. Upon discovering a hostile, the soldiers would then use the large quantity of weapons available at Nova Prospekt to either fire at them or bring them in as new prisoners. With a tight operation across the whole of the facility and a strong reputation that followed across the wasteland, it was believed by the civilians of Earth at this point that Nova Prospekt was a heavily fortified stronghold for a solid empire without weakness. But, unknown to them, the Combine still had their problems and would fight daily to keep control of the prison from stubborn outside forces. Although the Combine were slowly adapting the prison for their use, the older, unmanned cell blocks had become infested by Xenian lifeforms that had managed to move over to Earth during the Resonance Cascade, and now they had also made their home in the region. The advanced technology from the depot and scheduled rotations by the guards of the cell blocks had allowed the Combine to retain control of the newly adjusted areas of Nova Prospekt, but without the ability to generate force fields in the older areas and on the outside region, the Combine units continuously found themselves at war with the Xenian lifeforms for control of these older parts. On the beach surrounding the prison, the Combine installed large thumpers to slam into the ground, summoning large vibrations to scare away antlions. Although this worked for the most part, in combination with guards' patrols of the beach, these thumpers could not be installed inside of the prison due to a lack of space. With this, turrets were placed strategically around areas where the stone floor and walls had cracked and degraded. In turn, the perfect location to fire at any antlion that had made its way into the facility as they dug through the ground inwards. As the turrets fired at those coming in, Combine soldiers were also shown to watch from behind them, adding additional support if needed. As an additional backup, the soldiers also had access to trip mines, which, on activation, would blow up anything unlucky enough to breach its laser beam. In the basement and water-filled areas of the prison, barnacles had also made their way onto the ceilings, making the location almost never visited due to the fear of being caught on one of their dangerous tongues. Just like every other region of the wasteland, the headcrab species had also found their way to Nova Prospekt. Here, they would attempt to hide from sight just up until the point where they believed they could successfully latch onto the heads of the many Combine soldiers patrolling the prison. Not only were the standard headcrabs discovered here, but also the poisonous variation too, a dangerous foe to come across in the small hallways and crevices of the prison. With a constant fight for control of the prison against the Xenian lifeforms, and with their strong goals of developing new technology, creating new synths, acquiring information from the captured inmates, and various other important tasks, the Combine units stationed here had a lot of pressure to perform. But, as with every story, a new pressure would soon change the prison forever. As the resistance of humanity had grown over the years, they set up many locations across the wasteland, getting ready to fight against the Combine when the right time came. With all of the hard work and preparation, their time finally came when Dr. Gordon Freeman suddenly appeared within a train station in City 17. Upon his discovery of the changes to the planet in his absence, and in his exploration of the train station, Gordon is stopped by a fellow member of the Resistance, Barney Calhoun, from boarding a train to Nova Prospekt. And here, the Resistance truly began to show what it was capable of. On his journey, Gordon visits Black Mesa East, a Resistance base hidden on the outskirts of City 17. Unfortunately, during his time here, Dr. Eli Vance, a leader of the Resistance, is captured by the Combine and sent to Nova Prospekt. With this, Gordon sets out on a journey to free Eli and visits the terrifying prison. Arriving close to the Combine stronghold, Gordon acquires theropods. Crafted from the body of an antlion guard, these pods allowed Gordon to not only stay safe from the attacks of the antlions within the region, but also to set the antlion on any foe he came across. With this, he crossed the beach below the prison, deactivating the thumpers holding back many of the antlions, and then entered the prison using a tunnel underneath the courtyard. Here, he used the weaknesses of Nova Prospekt against the Combine guards stationed here to protect it. Working through, Gordon entered the main facility through the older, derelict A block and fought his way through to the depot. Along his path, he encountered the many Combine soldiers, manhacks, and their vast armory stationed here to protect and monitor the prison. But using his natural ability in combat and a horde of antlions to break through the weak areas of ground and walls, Gordon and his antlions took out any that came across them. With having left the prison behind him now unprotected by the now inactive Combine machinery and dead soldiers, the hallways of Nova Prospekt now lay empty, free to make their home here and protect it from Combine forces. Although the Combine had been able to defend this location to an extent, the later arrival of antlion guards proved too much for the guards to handle alone, leaving more of an aftermath of Gordon's interference within the facility. With the hallways filling up with antlions, and with Gordon having made it into the most important parts of the facility, the surviving guards were ordered to evacuate the older, now infested blocks where it would be left to the invading horde. Having made it to the train station, Gordon bumps into Alyx Vance, the daughter of Eli. Together, and through much combat, they make their way through the Block D8 cells into the most advanced part of the facility, the location where the Combine had been constructing their own entanglement device and where Eli was being held. Having brought destruction in their wake, Gordon and Alyx discover that a fellow Resistance member, Judith Mossman, had been working as a double agent. Working with the Combine, it appeared as though she had even aided them in their construction of their teleportation device, using her knowledge gathered from the construction of the teleportation devices that the Resistance had built within Black Mesa East and Dr. Isaac Kleiner's lab in City 17. Although Judith would go on to deny that she had anything to do with the construction of this device, her statement would be questioned due to just how similar this device looked to the ones created by the Resistance. Through a quick string of events, Judith manages to escape the facility using the teleporter, taking Eli with her. With the teleporter not having been constructed to the level the Resistance had built up theirs, the entanglement device becomes unstable. Aware of this instability, and with additional Combine soldiers attempting to breach the room, Gordon and Alyx also use the teleporter to escape, unaware the side effects that would come upon its use. Upon completion, Alyx and Gordon teleport away to safety, leaving the already crumbling facility at the mercy of the aftermath of the unstable entanglement device. In a flash of white, the teleporter unloaded all of its energy, destroying and killing everything it touched. As the aftermath of this explosion hit each part of the facility, the Xenian life forms, Combine soldiers, and even the trapped prisoners within the Combine cells were taken as Nova Prospekt fell, hundreds of innocent lives taken in just a moment. The destruction of Nova Prospekt not only resulted in the deaths of countless soldiers working under the orders of the Combine, but it also became a signal for the members of the Resistance scattered across the wasteland. If a major Combine hardpoint could be destroyed, then the Resistance could see past the unbreakable front that the Combine had shown since their invasion and actually take them on. With this, the Resistance took to the streets of City 17 and attempted to take control of it, where they would gather new allies along the way. With a full-on rebellion against the Combine rule, a new era had come upon the population of planet Earth, where an uprising had truly begun under the leadership of the smartest minds of humanity. Although the destruction of Nova Prospekt had resulted in the deaths of countless innocent humans and Vortigaunts that had acted out and spoken against the Combine, their deaths could now mean something, a chance to take down other Combine hardpoints and even remove their occupation from the planet. Over its life, Nova Prospekt had been viewed as a place to house the criminals of planet Earth, to a place of extreme horrors, and at its end, a signal of hope and a sign that the Combine were not as indestructible as they seemed. I asked the Resistance members, were the lives of the hundreds of innocent people trapped within Nova Prospekt really worth the spark that ignited the uprising, or were these people also worth rescuing, where they could have also fought in a future war stream?
Here we explore in the lore and story behind Epistle 3. After a brutal war with the Combine Empire,
a multi-dimensional alien force set on dominating all sentient life within the multiverse. It seemed that they had finally met their match when humanity struck back. While their occupation on other planets may have gone extremely easily, planet Earth had the strength to fight against this force. At the war's height, Judith Mossman had been sent to the north by Dr. Arne Magnusson to seek out the codes of the Combine homeworld in the event they would need them. While there, she was captured by Combine forces, but not before she could gather information about a mysterious, lost vessel that could change the tide of this war. After discovering both the Combine homeworld portal codes and information on the Borealis, a lost ship created by Aperture Science that held an immensely dangerous but powerful secret that could bring great change to the war, Dr. Eli Vance and Dr. Isaac Klein clashed with their views on what the Borealis should be used for once they got their hands on it. In Isaac's view, they could use the lost research vessel to make a great change and give the Resistance more of a chance in defeating the Combine, while Eli believed that using the Borealis for any purpose could lead to another event just as bad as the Resonance Cascade. With this, Eli pleads that Gordon and Alyx destroy the ship when on their upcoming trip to the north to save Judith, and now, firstly discover the lost piece of technology, and secondly, decide what to do with it. The Resistance fought a final wave of Combine forces and sent off their rocket with the intent to close a forming super portal that would, if allowed to grow into maturity, allow the Combine to send through their vast armies and take over the planet once again and crush the Resistance. To the Resistance's luck, their rocket was launched successfully and the portal closed, leaving the Combine units on Earth abandoned. Having fixed up an old helicopter, Alyx, Gordon, and Eli head to the hangar to set off. Unfortunately, Combine advisors attack the group in a last-ditch effort to stop their plans. During the attack, one of the Combine advisors brutally murders Eli in front of his daughter, leaving yet another victim to the Combine rule. To Gordon and Alyx's luck, Dog crashes through the ceiling and fights off the advisors, saving their lives, but the damage had already been done, and now the Resistance had to decide what to do next without one of their strongest leaders to guide them. With Eli Vance having been murdered by the Combine advisors within the hangar of White Forest, both Gordon and Alyx, as well as the rest of the Resistance, mourned the loss of one of the great and prominent members of their cause, as Eli had the information about the Borealis in his brain when he had died. The Resistance feared that the surviving Combine advisor may have absorbed important information about the Resistance's cause, fearing any future plan of the rebellion to have been compromised. With the Resistance full of sadness, they came together to bury Eli and honor his memory. Soon, talk came of the plan ahead and the mystery of the Borealis. Following the wishes of their beloved leader, the Resistance decided to follow through with the plan to travel to the north to seek out Judith's fate and discover the secrets of the Borealis that she had found just before her capture. As Gordon and Alyx prepared to leave, the people spoke of what to actually do with the Borealis upon discovery. Some believed that it should be destroyed, just like Dr. Eli Vance had wanted, as it could not only potentially give the Combine access to whatever advanced technology was on board, but also, if used incorrectly by the Resistance, this could have the potential to trigger something just as bad as a resonance cascade, or maybe something even worse. The others within the Resistance believed that upon the discovery of this lost research vessel, they could use the technologies within to aid the Resistance in a success against the Combine Empire and free humanity from their awful rule. But, as no one actually knew what resided on the Borealis, the decision would be left to Gordon and Alyx if they were even able to discover it. With Judith's coordinates to hand, Alyx and Gordon set off using the helicopter, hoping that the Combine had not discovered the Borealis yet either. With the Combine having stormed Judith's base, as well as their advisor taking whatever it could from Eli's brain, it was clear that the Combine had information, but if it were enough to go on, they were unsure. Aware that this trip to the north could be quite dangerous, another group of the Resistance chose to follow Alyx and Gordon in a separate helicopter where they could supply additional support if they were to come into any trouble with the Combine. After hours of traveling, Gordon and Alyx make it to the north, but for an unknown reason, suddenly and without warning, the helicopter was unable to transport them, leaving the duo to continue to follow the coordinates on foot. Continuing on, Gordon and Alyx finally come across the Borealis, but to their disappointment, they find that the Combine had already made it here first. With their technology, the Combine had constructed a fortified barricade around a field of open ice. While at first there appeared to be nothing of interest within it, they watched as the Borealis faded in and out of existence. One moment there, one moment gone. At first, Gordon and Alyx thought that the Combine technology around the ship was somehow manipulating it, but upon further inspection, they understood the ship to be actually teleporting itself in and out of the area. And now they could see the Combine technology surrounding it was attempting to bring the ship into complete coherence. With this amazing feat happening before their eyes, this confirmed to Gordon and Alyx that the technology on board had great potential to either aid the Resistance or destroy it. Understanding that the Combine had placed the technology around the ship to seize and then study it, they continued to follow the coordinates that Judith had given them, believing these coordinates to be the place where the ship would materialize for long enough for them to get on board before it disappeared again. On their journey to these coordinates, Combine soldiers had become aware of Gordon and Alyx's presence, where they were later captured. To their luck, the duo discovered that they had been spotted by Dr. Wallace Breen, but not a version that they had been familiar with. During their last interaction, Wallace had been attempting to open up a portal to the Combine homeworld in the hopes he could leave Earth and avoid the wrath of the Resistance for his part in working with the Combine. But this version of Wallace was different. Although his physical body had seemingly died after falling into the depths of the Citadel after Gordon had destroyed the Dark Fusion reactor, the Combine had used an earlier version of Wallace's memories and imprinted them onto a Combine advisor where he would now live as one of them, unaware of what had actually happened to his physical form. Aware of the reputation Gordon held amongst his fellow Combine members, this slug version of Wallace slightly feared him, but he feared the Combine even more. He confessed to Gordon and Alyx that he was, just like many others, simply a prisoner of the Combine and a tool to their continued dominance over the planet. Disgusted with what the Combine had turned him into, he asks Gordon to end his life. Believing Breen to have been partly responsible for her father's death, as well as the awful conditions, losses, and situations that the Resistance had found themselves in, Alyx believed that a quick death would be too good for Wallace, regardless of whether this version had no memory of the pain he had caused. While Alyx did have strong feelings about how Wallace should suffer, Gordon felt pity and compassion for this Breen grub, and upon having some time away from Alyx, he may have followed through with the grotesque creature's plea of release from a miserable existence. Free from their brief detainment of Breen's forces, Gordon and Alyx later come across Judith after finding her locked inside of a Combine interrogation cell. As Judith had been captured by the Combine and detained as the uprising continued without her, she was unaware of the brutal murder of Eli. In her grief, Alyx blames Judith for his death, believing her actions and betrayal to have had a major impact on the war, increasing the wedge between them in their relationship. Upon hearing this, Judith attempts to convince both Gordon and Alyx that Eli had been aware of her cooperation with the Combine all along, and she had been using them to gain an advantage against the dominating alien force. She had known how it would look to the rest of the Resistance, that she would be branded as a traitor, but the reward for taking part in such a dangerous mission would give the Resistance that advantage they needed. With her explanation complete, Gordon believes her to be telling the truth, but in Alyx's highly distressed state, she refuses to believe a word Judith says. Regardless of whether Alyx believed Judith or not, She possessed the knowledge on how to bring the Borealis completely into this plane of existence, where they could then board it. Fighting through Combine forces, the trio reach a Combine research post. Here, while Judith attempts to attune the frequencies required to bring the research vessel completely into this dimension, Gordon and Alyx fight off the Combine forces stationed here to protect the post. With more Combine units on the way, Judith completes her task, bringing forth the ship. Still avoiding the Combine forces, the trio board the Borealis just in time before it phased out of existence. Looking back, they see their resistance reinforcements arrive, and now the Combine could hopefully be held off long enough for Gordon, Alyx, and Judith to figure out how this ship worked. On board, the trio begin to understand where the ship went when it disappeared. Looking around them, they watch as the Borealis jumps from universe to universe. Here, they see distant worlds free from any Combine invasion. As the ship had the ability to teleport, Gordon, Alyx, and Judith wander it, searching for the power source that allowed it to perform this extremely advanced task. Finding the control room, the trio discovered that the journey of this ship not only covered various other worlds, but also various other times. Its non-linear timeline showed them that during its development, a team had constructed the Bootstrap device, a self-contained device capable of creating a field large enough to cover the entire ship. When activated, it was designed to send the ship anywhere in space and time. The team, working from the Aperture Science Research Facility, had seen this as the next stage in their scientific path, but without testing, they could not be sure of the risk that came with such an advanced piece of technology. As the Combine invaded the planet, the scientists became aware that the dominating alien force was searching planet Earth for its research facilities. With Black Mesa having been destroyed and Aperture known across the planet as a rival, they knew that it was only a matter of time before the Combine would come for them. With this, they activated the Bootstrap device, unaware of the consequences in doing so. Selecting a place as far away as they could, the scientists programmed the Borealis to send them to the Arctic North, away from any conflict. Upon activation, the ship created a field around itself and then flung through space and time, landing not only within the chosen destination, but also simultaneously in many time zones, planets, and dimensions. Existing before, during, and after the Combine invasion all at once, Gordon watched as the Borealis flung through time and space. He could see the scientists left behind attempting to board the ship, as well as the Combine soldiers fighting with the members of the Resistance that had come to aid Gordon. Time moved and stayed still at the same time. Through these glimpses, Alyx saw what she believed to be a staging area for a Combine invasion, ready to attack an innocent civilization just like they had to Earth many years before. As the ship stretched and navigated space and time, Gordon, Alyx, and Judith attempted to discuss what they planned to do with the ship now that they had it in their possession. Destroy it, or somehow control and manipulate its technology to aid the resistance against the Combine. As they discussed this, the ship sent through waves of side effects caused by the Bootstrap device. Time loops sent through the ship like bubbles resulted in additional versions of Gordon, Alyx, and Judith all in one space. With their minds confused, emotions heightened, and a tough decision to make, the discussion increased into an argument between Alyx and Judith on what the best course of action to take was. Already angry and distrustful of Judith, Alyx argued that the ship should be destroyed, following her father's wishes, while Judith argued that they should deliver it to the Resistance and study it. As the argument escalated, Alyx suggested that they should set the ship to self-destruct and send the ship into the heart of the Combine homeworld, where it would hopefully destroy them and save not only humanity, but countless civilizations across the entire multiverse from their dominating reign. In response to this, Judith attempted to overpower Alyx and turn off the Bootstrap device to allow it to rest within the ice surrounding it. With this, in a heated struggle, Alyx shoots Judith, killing her. With her death, Alyx had honoured her father's wish, and whether Gordon liked it or not, they would set the Borealis to self-destruct and ride it together into the Combine homeworld. As Alyx arms the ship, essentially turning it into a time-travelling missile, the duo, who had already been through enough pain and war for one lifetime, accepted their fate as the Borealis began its final trip. In this moment, the G-Man appeared aboard the ship, this time taking an interest in Alyx instead of Gordon. Through her life, Alyx had interacted with the G-Man twice, once as a child during the Black Mesa incident, and secondly, after she had been attacked and almost killed by a hunter in the Outlands. Although she had not properly seen this mysterious entity since her childhood, she did indeed recognize him. With their imminent demise coming up, the G-Man tells Alyx that they have places to do and people to be. Upon saying this, Alyx follows the G-Man through one of his portals out of this reality, closing the portal behind them, leaving Gordon alone. Looking outwards, Gordon watches as the Borealis enters the Combine home universe, and ahead, he sees just how vast their empire was. The dominating alien force had managed to construct part of their empire around an entire star. They had constructed a Dyson sphere, something humanity had only thought to be theoretically possible. Their empire, knowledge and power was much larger than anyone had ever thought, and then it dawned on him just how low of an impact humanity had and ever would make. That the Borealis, upon impact, would merely be registered by the Combine. Believing all to be lost and all hope gone, Gordon waited for his fate, but, to his luck, the Vortigaunt had discovered his location and, using their abilities, plucked him out of the Borealis, where it hit the Combine homeworld and exploded. Landing on an unknown shore in an unknown time, Gordon did know that a lot of time had passed since he had stepped onto the Borealis in the north. He believed that enough time would have passed for those that had been around during his time with the Resistance would remember his name, but most of those he had known best had either been murdered, disappeared, or aged with time. Even now, after everything he had been through, Gordon was completely unaware of whether the resistance of humanity had defeated the Combine Empire or whether humanity had fallen, just like many other civilizations. With this ending having left the series and fans still without an actual conclusion of how the whole story ended, on August 27, 2017, Mark tweeted small changes to this story, stating that a sketch is only a starting point and that everything changes as you try to make it real. He further went on to say that Alyx shooting Judith just wouldn't work, as I am assuming here, it just did not fit Alyx's character, and so, Mark made a few tweets suggesting changes to his posted story. In one, he offers a change in Judith and Alyx's fight. In this alternate version, Alyx pushes Judith into a time loop or a portal bubble instead of shooting her, leaving Judith's fate unknown to Gordon. I think this one makes more sense than Alyx shooting her. What do you think? Moving on, Mark suggests that Barney would likely have a part in this too, as well as Dog. Sadly, he did not go into more detail about a role they could play. You will also notice here that he refers to Barney as Bernadette and Dog as Cat, something I will get into shortly. Finally, and this is my favourite, an alternate ending, that as the Borealis exploded, it triggers a huge time loop that sends Gordon back onto the inbound train in Black Mesa, beginning the whole story again. Now this could go two ways. Either Gordon lands on the tram platform fully aware of what is to come and can now stop the experiment, stopping the Combine invasion from ever happening, or the second way it could go is that Gordon lands on that platform losing all memory of what had happened and the loop begins again. In my opinion, that would have been a pretty great ending for the Half-Life series. Posted onto his blog on August 25th, 2017, Mark Laidlaw gave the fans exactly what we had been waiting for a whole 10 years, Epistle 3, clearly a reference to Episode 3. Not a complete conclusion of the story, but still something that could give us some sense of closure. Now, as some of you probably know, Epistle 3 was written as a sort of fanfiction, I guess. Even by Mark's own account, from a deleted tweet, we can see he stated this. My website's down for now. I guess fanfic is popular. Even a gender swap snapshot of a dream I had many years ago. Luckily, this tweet was used in multiple news articles at the time, so there were still traces of it out there for me to find during my research. Following on from Mark posting Epistle 3 to his blog, both he and other developers that worked at Valve did state that there was never an actual plot put into place for Episode 3, and Epistle 3 was actually just a thought Mark had about the series, and in turn, is not to be considered the official canon ending for the Half-Life series. Moving on, Mark wrote Epistle 3 as a letter to the player, being us I guess. As you can tell during my telling of the story, I used all of the names we are familiar with in the series. But Mark wrote this as a gender-swapped version of the story with different names. I'll do a quick run-through of the differences. In this gender-swap story, Gordon Freeman is referred to as Gertie Fremont. What was interesting about this is that Mark actually gave us insight into what Gordon was thinking. A good example is when Alyx does not believe Judith to have been working for the Resistance all along, and we get confirmation here that Gordon agrees with her. Anyway, Alyx Vance is referred to as Alyx Vaughn. Her father Eli is named Ellie Vaughn. Judith Mossman is Dr. Jerry Mass. The transformed Wallace Breen, also known as Breen Grub after transformation, is called Dr. Bree before transformation and Bree Slug after transformation in the story, and the G-Man is referred to as Mrs. X. With the characters out of the way, Vortigauns are given the impressive name of Ghastly Haunts. The Borealis is given the name the Hyperborea, a nice nod to the ship's original name during the development cycle and into the beta. The Combine are named the Disparate. I hope I said that correctly. And the Aperture Science Research Facility are named the Toxin Island Research Base. I wanted to create the video this way with the characters' real names so that those who had never read Epistle 3 could A. follow the story easily, and B. actually give them an excuse to read it. This is the closure we never got, and it is absolutely worth a read. I have put a link to it in the description. With Breen Grub having been mentioned in the story, it is actually really interesting to note that Mark also created a Breen Grub Twitter account in 2012, 5 years before he posted Epistle 3. The Breen Grub Twitter account adds a little background to his story after Half-Life 2. After his memories are imprinted upon a Combine advisor, he wakes up in his new form. On May 31st, 2012, Breen makes his first tweet seemingly adapting to his new form, and over the following days, he attempts to contact members of the Resistance in an attempt to help them against the Combine by dropping pieces of information to help the rebellion on a channel he believed to be secure. Through 180 tweets up until 2014, his tweets show him adjusting to his new form, attempting to help the Resistance by making them aware of the enemies around them, and finally, Breen is seemingly taken over by an evil force where his motivations later change to trying to find out where the Resistance were hiding. I will not go too much into detail about Breen Grub, as I do intend to make a whole video about it, but with the existence of this Twitter account while Mark was still at Valve and Breen Grub appearing again in Epistle 3, I would say that it is a strong possibility that Breen Grub was meant to be in Episode 3. I would have hoped that we as the player would then have had the choice on whether to put him out of his misery or let him continue to suffer in his new form. 2 years after Breen Grub stopped tweeting, Mark left Valve.